Chapter 541. A Golden Birthday, 6. Do all these girls want to make this a tradition? I mused as Rachel led me to lunch with her father and sister after spending the night with her. At least, unlike Cecilia, Rachel hadn't insisted I address her father as father while radiating enough audacity to light up a city. Small mercies, I supposed. And unlike Quinn, I found Alastor much easier to deal with. The Creighton estate, though, was something else entirely. If the Slatemark Imperial Palace was the pinnacle of regal grandeur, this place was steeped in an almost otherworldly charm. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, as though the walls held whispers of centuries past. We moved through the estate's intricate halls, each more striking than the last, until we arrived at the dining hall. Sunlight streamed through crystalline windows, casting refracted rainbows across polished surfaces. The effect was mesmerizing, like stepping into a realm of light and shadow carefully crafted to dazzle the senses. The architecture spoke of generations of refinement, where each successive family head had added their own touch without disrupting the harmonious whole. Crystal formations grew naturally from the walls in some places, suggesting the estate had been built around existing magical phenomena rather than imposed upon the landscape. Catheln and Alastor were already seated, their presence as composed and stately as the room itself. Catheln's silver hair caught the light as she glanced up at me, her piercing blue eyes unreadable but not unwelcoming. Alastor, on the other hand, wore an expression I couldn't quite place, somewhere between polite neutrality and quiet approval. The dining table itself was a work of art, carved from what appeared to be a single piece of crystalline stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The chairs were similarly elegant, comfortable despite their ethereal appearance. Rachel slid into her seat gracefully, gesturing for me to take mine beside her. Her movements held the practiced elegance of someone raised in this environment, yet there was nothing stiff or artificial about it. "Well," Alastor said, breaking the silence with his characteristic directness. "Shall we begin?" I nodded respectfully, taking care to maintain proper posture despite the casual nature of the gathering. "Good morning, Uncle. Your Highness. You can just call me older sister, Arthur," Catheln said with a rare smile that transformed her usually serious expression. There was genuine warmth in the gesture, a sign that I had earned her acceptance over time. "Thank you, older sister," I replied, still a touch hesitant but genuinely appreciative of the gesture. Family titles carried weight in noble households, and being offered such familiarity was significant. Lunch began smoothly, the soft clinking of utensils creating a pleasant rhythm against the backdrop of gentle conversation. The food itself was exceptional, not just in quality but in presentation, each dish arranged with an artist's eye for both beauty and flavor. To my relief, Alastor didn't seem to hold any visible grudge about my spending the night with Rachel, though I remained on guard just in case. The situation could have been far more awkward, given the circumstances of how we'd all come together this morning. The conversation flowed naturally around topics of the estate, recent political developments, and general pleasantries. I found myself relaxing despite my initial apprehension, reminded of why I had always respected Alastor's straightforward approach to relationships. Partway through the meal, Alastor turned to me with a more serious question. "So, Arthur, what do you think of your current spellcasting level?" I considered my words carefully before responding, knowing that honesty would serve me better than false modesty. "Honestly, it's very lacking." His gaze sharpened with interest rather than judgment. "Lacking how?" "It's not lacking for a normal peak integration ranker," I clarified, wanting to be precise about my self-assessment. "But compared to my swordsmanship, it's nowhere close. The gap feels insurmountable." Alastor nodded thoughtfully, his expression becoming more analytical. "Your swordsmanship talent is extraordinary, almost unnaturally so. It's not surprising your spellcasting struggles to keep pace. But you've also neglected it, haven't you?" "Yes," I admitted without hesitation. There was no point in denying it, and Alastor would see through any attempt at deflection. My focus had been almost entirely on the sword, treating magic as a supplementary skill rather than a primary discipline. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table, a habit I recognized from our previous training sessions together. The gesture usually indicated he was formulating a teaching approach or considering multiple angles of a problem. Your spellcasting may never rival your swordsmanship. That's the reality of specializing to your degree, he said finally. But it doesn't need to. What you should aim for is versatility. Develop your spellcasting enough that it becomes a reliable ace up your sleeve. A tool to complement your primary strengths, not compete with them. His words resonated with me, offering a practical solution to what had seemed like an insurmountable imbalance. I nodded, feeling a sense of direction beginning to form. I understand, Uncle. I'll work to close the gap, not to match my swordsmanship, but to make it count when it matters. Alastair's faint smile deepened as he nodded approvingly. Good. You've always been sharp, Arthur. Keep that mindset and you'll go further than even I expect. Though, truthfully, you've already shattered any expectations I had for you. The praise felt genuine rather than perfunctory, coming from someone who had seen me at my weakest and watched my development over time. Thank you, Uncle, I said with a grin. He leaned back in his chair, clearly transitioning to a more detailed discussion. So, how do you want to approach this? What's your timeline and methodology? I was thinking of working towards seven-circle magic, I began, gathering my thoughts. It seems like the logical next step to bridge the gap between my current capabilities and something more substantial. Alastair's eyes lit up with genuine interest and perhaps a hint of excitement. That's ambitious, but entirely achievable for someone of your caliber. In fact, I have a proposal for you. He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious and focused. Stay here at the Creighton estate for a few months. I can guide you through the fundamentals of seven-circle magic personally. The environment here is naturally conducive to advanced spellcasting, and you'd have access to our family's accumulated knowledge and resources. I felt a flicker of conflict at his generous offer. The opportunity was incredible, direct mentorship from one of the continent's greatest spellcasters in mastering seven-circle magic, with access to resources that most mages could only dream of. But, Uncle, I hesitated, feeling somewhat guilty about my response. I appreciate the offer, truly. It's more generous than I deserve. But I've been away from my family for so long. My parents, my sister, they've been worried about me for months during my various absences. I promised them I'd spend more time at home. Alastair studied my face for a moment, his expression softening with what appeared to be understanding rather than disappointment. Family is important, Arthur. I respect that commitment, and I think it speaks well of your character. He paused, clearly considering alternatives. Here's what we'll do then. Go home, spend time with your family. Work on developing your foundation for seven-circle magic using conventional methods. The Fuller method should serve you well initially. Once you've mastered that foundation and feel ready for the next step, come back here. Come back? I asked, intrigued by the implication. The Astrius method I mentioned earlier, Alastair explained with a slight smile that suggested he was pleased with this compromise. It's far superior to the Fuller method for advanced spellcasting. Think of the Fuller method as building the foundation of a house, while Astrius is the master architecture that turns that foundation into a palace. You'll need both, but Astrius will truly unlock your potential. Relief washed over me, both at his understanding and at the elegant solution he'd proposed. That sounds perfect, Uncle. Thank you for understanding my situation. Of course, he said warmly, his tone carrying genuine affection. Besides, this way you'll come to the Astrius method with a stronger foundation already in place. It'll make the learning process more efficient and allow me to focus on the advanced concepts rather than basic principles. Rachel, who had been listening quietly throughout this exchange, smiled brightly. That works out well for everyone. You can focus on your family time without feeling like you're missing out on training opportunities. Cathal nodded approvingly, adding her own perspective. And it gives you time to think about your academy situation as well. That's another decision that shouldn't be rushed. Speaking of which, Alastair continued, his tone becoming more curious. Have you given more thought to whether you'll return to the academy? I rubbed my chin thoughtfully, considering the various factors at play. I'm still considering it. Honestly, I'm already stronger than most of the professors there. I don't see myself learning much more from the standard curriculum. The Academy's prestige will take quite the hit if their rank 1 student leaves. Kathleen observed with a small smile that suggested she found the political implications amusing. They'd likely offer you some very generous terms to keep you, Alastair suggested, his voice carrying the tone of someone familiar with institutional politics. Custom curriculum, extended leave policies, access to restricted resources. Do you think I should stay? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective given his experience with both education and practical application. He considered the question seriously before responding. It depends on what you want to achieve. If you're looking for traditional academic advancement, probably not. But if you want to leverage the Academy's resources and connections while maintaining flexibility for your other commitments, it could be valuable. Rachel leaned forward, clearly interested in this discussion. Plus, there might be opportunities to help other students or contribute to research that interests you. I found myself nodding as I thought through their points. You know what? I think I will go back for 1 final year. I don't have much else scheduled for the immediate future anyway, and it would give me a structured environment to work on the Fuller method. That's a practical decision, Alastair approved. You can use the Academy's resources to build your magical foundation while maintaining your other relationships and commitments. Kathleen smiled. And Rachel will be there too, so you won't be completely separated from this part of your life. Exactly, I said, feeling good about the decision. 1 more year to tie up loose ends, strengthen my magical abilities, and then move on to whatever comes next. The conversation continued pleasantly, touching on various topics related to my future plans and current relationships. By the end of lunch, I felt like I had a clear path forward that honored both my commitments and my ambitions. It was, I reflected, exactly the kind of balanced approach that would serve me well in the complex life I was building. Chapter 542. Gold Rank Guild 1. After Rachel's birthday, there were a few weeks before it was Seraphina's 18th birthday celebration. But I had pressing guild business that couldn't wait. The plan with the Eastern Continent expansion would have to be delayed. Instead, I needed to focus on a more immediate advancement. It was time for Ouroboros to officially become a gold rank guild. There were not many gold rank guilds in the Slatemark Empire. 50 to be exact. Each one commanded significant political and economic influence, with access to resources and dungeons that bronze and silver rank guilds could only dream of. And now there was going to be 51. I sat in my office within our guild headquarters, reviewing the digital documentation that would change everything. Using my 8-star adventurer license alongside our guild's exceptional performance record, we had more than met the requirements for gold rank certification. This would grant us access to 8-star dungeons, significantly increase our operational budget, and most importantly, elevate our political standing within the Empire's guild hierarchy. Is it not a bit early? Callie asked, standing across from my desk with folded arms, biting her lower lip, a nervous habit she developed whenever she was genuinely concerned about something. I looked up from the certification files on my holographic display. Are you scared? A bit, she admitted, her usual confidence wavering. I mean, it is quite early in our development timeline. She had a point. Callie was currently at the same mana rank as me, peak integration rank, making me the only 8-star adventurer in our guild. We had 2 official 7-star adventurers in Reika and Carrie, with several 6-star members rounding out our roster. By conventional standards, most guilds spent years building up their membership before attempting gold rank certification. What she was really commenting on was the unprecedented pace of our advancement. In less than 2 years, we'd gone from a startup guild to challenging for gold rank status. It was faster than any guild in recorded history. I tapped my fingers thoughtfully on the desk, considering her concerns. You're right about the pace, but we're not a conventional guild. Besides, I have something that will solve our membership strength issue. What are you talking about? Callie asked, her analytical mind immediately shifting into problem-solving mode. Instead of answering directly, I pressed the communication panel on my desk to summon Reika and Elias. We needed all the core leadership present for what I was about to reveal. Both of them entered the room within minutes. Reika's transformation over the past months had been remarkable. Her confidence had grown alongside her power, and the flower patterns in her eyes seemed to shimmer with renewed intensity when she looked at me. Did I imagine that? I thought, noticing the way her gaze lingered. No, you didn't, Luna commented with amusement. A fifth girl is madly in love with you. Your collection keeps growing. I pushed that observation aside for later consideration. Anyway, I have something important to show all of you. Something that will give Ouroboros a significant advantage over every other guild in the Empire. The three of them exchanged glances, their attention fully focused. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. Time to reveal one of my greatest advantages as someone with knowledge from another world. What I'm about to tell you must remain absolutely confidential. I began, my tone serious enough to make them all straighten. What I'm going to share could revolutionize not just our guild, but magical technology across the entire continent. I stood and moved to the holographic map of the known world projected from my office wall. Tell me, what do you know about mana conductivity? Elias answered first, his business background giving him practical knowledge. Mana technology requires materials that can channel magical energy, but they're limited and inefficient. Most conductive materials come from magical beast corpses. Bones, blood, treated hide. Exactly, I nodded. It's grotesque, inefficient, and the supply is limited by how many magical beasts we can hunt. But what if I told you there was a material that could conduct mana with perfect efficiency? Something that could revolutionize everything from communication devices to dungeon exploration equipment. Callie leaned forward, her strategic mind immediately grasping the implications. Such a material would be worth more than all the credits in the Imperial Treasury. Every continent would go to war over it. Which is why, I said, turning back to face them, no one else can know about Aetheryte. The name hung in the air like a revelation. Aetheryte is a crystalline formation created under very specific magical conditions, I explained. It's imbued with the concentrated intent of living creatures, making it the perfect mana conductor. Think of it as magical fossil fuel, but infinitely more valuable. Reika's eyes widened, the flower patterns in her irises seeming to pulse with excitement. Where can we find this Aetheryte? I smiled, knowing this would be the most shocking part. The moon. The silence that followed was deafening. The moon? Elias repeated slowly, as if he hadn't heard correctly. The moon, I confirmed. Aetheryte exists naturally in lunar formations, created by centuries of magical energy absorption from our world below. And here's the crucial part. We're the only ones who know about it. Callie was already calculating, her mind working through the logistics. Even if this Aetheryte exists, how would we possibly reach the moon? Space travel technology exists, but it's incredibly expensive and restricted. Actually, we have a more direct route, I said, enjoying their expressions of disbelief. There's exactly one place on this continent with the capability to transport people to the moon instantly. The Tower of Magic. They have a dimensional gateway that connects to a research station established there decades ago. The Tower of Magic, Elias murmured. That's Master Charlotte's domain. Exactly. And Charlotte Alaric happens to be one of my mentors, I said, which means we have a potential path to the moon, and therefore to unlimited Aetheryte. The implications began to dawn on them. Callie was the first to speak, her voice filled with awe. If we could monopolize Aetheryte, we wouldn't just be a gold-ranked guild. We'd be the most powerful organization on the continent. Now you're beginning to understand, I said. But first things first, we need to officially achieve gold rank status. That will give us the political protection and resources necessary to pursue the Aetheryte project. Over the next few days, we completed the gold rank certification process. The guild authorities' inspection was thorough but routine. Our performance metrics were so far above the minimum requirements that approval was essentially guaranteed. The certification ceremony took place at the guild authorities' headquarters in Avalon City. The building itself was a marvel of magical architecture and advanced technology, with holographic displays showing real-time guild rankings and dungeon-clearing statistics from across the continent. As I stood before the guild authority official, accepting our new gold rank charter on a crystalline data tablet, I couldn't help but think about how this was just the beginning. "Congratulations, Guild Master Nightingale," the guild authority official said, transmitting the official documentation to my personal device. "Ouroboros is now the 51st gold rank guild in the Slatemark Empire. May your success continue to bring honor to our nation." The assembled crowd of guild representatives and authority officials applauded politely, but I could see the mixture of respect and wariness in their eyes. We'd risen too fast, achieved too much in too little time. We were now a factor they'd have to consider in their own strategic planning. As we left the ceremony, Callie walked beside me, her expression thoughtful. "So what's our next move, Guild Master?" "Now," I said, looking up at the sky where the moon was barely visible in the afternoon light, "I pay a visit to the Tower of Magic. It's time to have a conversation with Charlotte about our future plans." Chapter 543, Gold Rank Guild 2, The Tower of Magic. A sleek building over 1 kilometer high, its crystalline spire piercing the clouds above Avalon City like a needle threading the heavens. This place had been my home for a brief time during my first summer break in this world, where I'd sharpened my mind aspect alongside Cecilia and Rose. The memories of those days felt distant now. Simpler times when my greatest concern was mastering basic spell formations rather than orchestrating continental power shifts. As I approached the main entrance, I couldn't help but remember the chaos of 2 years ago when the Order of the Fallen Flame had launched their assault. The tower's defenses were significantly stronger now, with layered barrier systems and automated guardian constructs that made the building virtually impregnable. The receptionist recognized my name immediately, her professional demeanor brightening with genuine respect. "Master Arthur Nightingale, Archmage Charlotte has been expecting you. She's in her office on the 200th floor." The elevator ride gave me time to consider how to approach this conversation. Charlotte Alaric was one of my mentors, someone who had taken genuine interest in my potential during those early days, but she was also notoriously lazy about anything that didn't directly involve magical research or theoretical advancement. Convincing her to commit the tower's resources to a joint venture would require presenting the opportunity in terms she couldn't ignore, intellectual curiosity paired with practical benefits. I found her exactly where I expected, sprawled in an oversized chair behind her desk, jade green eyes half closed as she absently manipulated a floating magical equation that seemed to shift and evolve of its own accord. Her red hair was tied back in a characteristically messy bun. "Arthur," she said without opening her eyes fully, though I could see the calculating intelligence behind her lazy expression. "I was wondering when you'd come to collect on that sponsorship I promised you." "You knew I was coming, Master?" "Of course I knew. You just became eligible for gold rank certification, your guild's performance metrics are off the charts, and you're the type to move fast when you see an opportunity." She finally sat up properly, fixing me with those sharp jade eyes that always seemed to see more than they should. The casual way she moved couldn't hide the fact that she was one of the most powerful mages on the continent. "The real question is what you're planning to do with gold rank status that's got you so eager." I settled into the chair across from her desk, noting how the office had changed since my last visit. New research materials were scattered everywhere, crystal formations, ancient tomes, and what looked like prototype magical devices in various stages of completion. "Can't I just want to advance my guild naturally?" "Arthur, you've never done anything naturally in your life. You saved my tower, protected my niece, and somehow managed to become the most talked-about adventurer on the continent before your 19th birthday." She leaned forward with genuine curiosity, her lazy demeanor sharpening into focused attention. "So what's the real plan?" This was the moment I'd been building toward. Charlotte was brilliant, influential, and, most importantly, she owed me a significant favor from the tower incident. But she was also someone who would see through any deception immediately, which meant I needed to be strategic about how much truth to reveal. "I have information about a resource that could revolutionize magical technology," I said carefully, watching her reaction. Something that would make current mana conductivity materials obsolete and fundamentally change how we approach magical engineering. Her jade eyes sharpened with interest, and I could practically see her brilliant mind shifting into research mode. Now you have my attention. What kind of resource are we talking about? Something called etherite. It's a crystalline formation that can conduct mana with perfect efficiency. No loss, no degradation. Charlotte sat up straighter, her lazy demeanor evaporating completely as the implications hit her. That would change everything. Perfect mana conductivity would revolutionize every aspect of magical technology. Communication networks, dungeon exploration equipment, transportation systems, defensive barriers, offensive weapons. She trailed off, her mind clearly racing through possibilities. Where does this etherite exist? The moon. The silence that followed was profound, but not surprised. Charlotte stared at me for several long moments, her brilliant mind clearly working through the implications and logistics. Of course, she said finally, a slow smile spreading across her face. The moon. We've been studying the lunar environment for 15 years, but we've been focused on astronomical observations and magical field research, not mineral extraction. She leaned back, studying me with renewed interest. The question is, how did you know about etherite when our own researchers haven't identified anything matching your description? Let's just say I have access to unique sources of information, I said, using the careful phrasing I'd planned. What matters is that this represents an unprecedented opportunity for both the Tower and Ouroboros. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her desk as she considered the possibilities. I could see her analytical mind working through the practical applications and the strategic advantages of controlling such a resource. Etherite with perfect mana conductivity, she murmured. The applications would be limitless. Her jade eyes gleamed with intellectual excitement. And if we control the source, we control the future of magical technology development. Exactly. Which is why I'm proposing a formal partnership between Ouroboros and the Tower. She raised an eyebrow. Partnership? That's a significant step beyond sponsorship. The scope of this project demands it, I explained. We're not talking about a simple favor or a standard guild advancement. This is about establishing dominance in an entirely new field of magical technology. Ouroboros provides the exploration, extraction, and field testing capabilities. The Tower provides access to the Lunar Gateway, research facilities, and most importantly, your expertise in magical research and development. Charlotte stood and walked to the window, looking out over Avalon City spread below. You're talking about more than just mining operations. You want us to develop the alchemical processes for refining etherite, create the theoretical framework for its applications, design the practical implementations. I want the Tower to become the center of etherite research and development, I confirmed. Every advancement, every application, every breakthrough, all of it flowing through your facilities and your people. In exchange, Ouroboros handles the dangerous work of extraction and field operations, while the Tower maintains its position as the premier magical research institution. She turned back to me with a calculating smile that didn't quite hide the excitement in her jade eyes. You know, sponsoring your guild for gold rank status was always part of my plan. You saved the Tower, and more importantly, you saved Rose. That earned you a significant favor. She paused, her expression growing more serious. But this etherite project, this would be a true partnership. The Tower provides access to the Lunar Gateway, research support, alchemical development, and theoretical advancement. Ouroboros provides exploration, extraction, security, and practical testing. We share the results and split the profits. That sounds reasonable, I agreed, though I'd want to keep the existence of etherite confidential until we can establish proper control over the resource and its applications. Naturally, no point in starting a continental war before we're ready to win it. Charlotte walked back to her desk and pulled out several official Tower documents. I'll submit the sponsorship paperwork today. You should have your gold rank certification within the week. As she began filling out the forms, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was exactly how I'd hoped the conversation would go. Charlotte's intellectual curiosity and practical ambition aligned perfectly with my strategic needs. "There is one other thing," she said as she worked, not looking up from the documents. "I've been monitoring your magical development, and I have to say your progress has been remarkable. When you first came to the tower, you were talented but raw. Now," she glanced up, studying me with professional interest. "Now you're approaching the threshold for ascendant rank advancement." I nodded carefully. "I've been working towards seven-circle mastery alongside formation of my sword heart." "Which method are you planning to use for your breakthrough?" she asked. "The Fuller method is most common, reliable if slow. The Asterius method, what the Cretans developed, is superior but harder." "I haven't decided yet," I admitted. Charlotte set down her pen and leaned forward with genuine interest. "What if I told you there was a third option?" Chapter 544. Gold Rank Guild 3. The Fuller method had a reputation that could walk into a room before its name was even spoken. It was the blueprint, the go-to, the gold standard for ascending into seven-circle magic and reaching the vaunted ascendant rank, where mages stopped worrying about basic spell formations and started worrying about existential threats and continental politics. But was it the best? That depended on whether you were the kind of person satisfied with reliable progress or needed to push beyond conventional limitations entirely. The Fuller method was, in essence, the everyman's path to ascension. It worked for most people the way established roads work for travelers: reliable, predictable, well-maintained. It was standardized, safe, and thoroughly tested across generations of mages. That wasn't a flaw. It was by design. It gave people a structured path to power, a stable framework for circle development. No wild variables. No risky improvisations. But that very simplicity was its ceiling, because the world didn't end at ascendant rank. Above it loomed the realms of the immortal rank and the radiant rank, where conventional magical theory became more suggestion than law. Talents capable of reaching those heights would find the Fuller method something akin to using basic training wheels. Functional, but ultimately limiting for those with greater potential. Which is where the Asterius method came in. Developed by the Cretan family, who were widely regarded as the most powerful spellcasting clan not currently governing their own magical territory, it was a method forged not just in magical theory, but in generations of practical innovation. It was complex, specialized, and highly customizable. It didn't provide hand-holding. It offered tools and expected mastery through personal understanding. Most people couldn't even begin it. But if you could, you didn't just climb the established path. You carved your own route through uncharted territory. And then there was Charlotte, who, being Charlotte, had taken one look at the vast, intricate legacy of spellcasting theory and decided she could do better. "I created this method for seven-circle spellcasting," she said, with the quiet confidence of someone unveiling revolutionary research. "I call it the Alaric method." She smiled with genuine pride. I waited for her to continue, sensing there was more to this revelation. "You're exceptional, Arthur. And I don't say that lightly. Your magical development has been remarkable, even by prodigy standards." "Thank you," I said, unsure whether to be flattered or concerned about what she was building toward. "So don't master just the Alaric method. And since you're already learning Asterius from the Cretans," she gave me a knowing look, "don't limit yourself to either one individually." I raised an eyebrow. Of course she knew about my connection to Rachel and her family's teachings. "Master both," she continued, as if it were the most natural progression in the world. "Then synthesize them. Merge their principles. Create your own method. One that doesn't just adapt to your magical signature, but becomes an extension of your fundamental understanding of magic itself." She leaned forward, her jade eyes bright with intellectual excitement. "Then expand that framework beyond 7 circles. 8 circles. 9 circles. Layer upon layer of innovation, until eventually you won't even need traditional circle structures anymore. You'll develop something entirely new, something beyond our current understanding of magical theory. A complete paradigm shift. You have the talent for it." The terrifying part? I believed her assessment was accurate. The prospect was both exhilarating and daunting. Creating my own magical method would require not just mastering existing techniques, but understanding them deeply enough to transcend their limitations. It would be years of intensive study and experimentation, with no guarantee of success. But the potential rewards. I'm willing to attempt it, I said finally. The challenge appeals to me, and the strategic advantages would be significant. Charlotte's smile widened. Excellent. I'll begin preparing the theoretical materials for the Alaric method. Between that and your Asterius training with the Cretans, you'll have access to both revolutionary approaches. She paused, then continued with a more serious expression. This will be demanding, Arthur, more than you might realize, but I believe you're capable of achieving something unprecedented. I nodded, then considered the broader implications of what we were discussing. Actually, Charlotte, I have a proposal that might benefit our Aetheryte research significantly. Oh, what if we brought the Cretan family into the Aetheryte collaboration? Their expertise in magical theory and practical applications would be invaluable, and combining the tower's resources with their capabilities could accelerate development considerably. Plus, their alchemical knowledge could help with refining and processing techniques. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Uh-oh. Luna's voice echoed in my mind with genuine alarm. Charlotte's expression shifted from enthusiastic collaboration to something considerably more dangerous. Her jade eyes narrowed, and I suddenly remembered that she wasn't just a brilliant researcher. She was one of the most powerful mages on the continent, and I had just suggested sharing exclusive access to the most revolutionary magical resource in history with her greatest rivals. Charlotte stared at the closed door for several long minutes after Arthur's departure, her magical aura gradually settling back to normal levels. The suggestion to share Aetheryte with the Cretans still rankled, but as her initial anger faded, she found herself thinking about the young man who had just left her office. Arthur Nightingale. Even his name had become something of a legend already. She remembered the first time she'd seen him, at a tower conference 3 years ago. His paper had broken her out of her boredom. She'd made him her disciple that day, one of the few decisions in her career that she'd never questioned. Then came the incident with her sister. Charlotte's expression darkened as she remembered that terrible day. Evelyn, her twin sister, who had somehow become the Pope of the Order of the Fallen Flame, humanity's greatest enemy. Evelyn, who had led an assault on the tower itself to reclaim her daughter Rose. By all rights, that attack should have succeeded. The Order's forces had been overwhelming, their magical capabilities devastating. Charlotte herself had been barely holding the tower's defenses together when everything changed. Arthur had been there, weak by any reasonable standard, barely capable of fifth circle magic at the time. He should have been utterly irrelevant. Instead, somehow, he had turned the tide. The details remained unclear even now. Arthur's explanations had been vague, deflecting attention from his role in the victory. But Charlotte knew better than most that effects had causes, and the effect had been decisive victory against impossible odds. It was one of many mysteries surrounding Arthur Nightingale. His rapid advancement, his uncanny strategic insights, his ability to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. None of it followed normal patterns. Charlotte had long suspected that Arthur was hiding something significant about his background or capabilities. The question was whether that secret was dangerous to her interests or merely inconvenient to his privacy. Given his track record, she was inclined to assume the latter. She pulled out a sheet of official tower stationery and began drafting a formal response to his proposal. The Aetheryte research would remain under tower control, as would Arthur's training in the Alaric method. But the broader collaboration on lunar operations could proceed as originally discussed. As for his suggestion about the Cretans, Charlotte's pen paused over the paper as she considered the implications more carefully. The Tower of Magic and the Cretan family were indeed rivals, had been for generations. Their approaches to magical theory were fundamentally different, their political philosophies incompatible, their institutional pride irreconcilable. But perhaps that rivalry was exactly why she should be concerned about Arthur's growing connections to both families. She set down her pen and walked to the window, looking out over Avalon City's sprawling magical districts. Arthur was already learning the Asterius method from the Cretans, through his relationship with Rachel, no doubt. Now he wanted to master the Alaric method as well. And he was proposing collaboration on Etherite research. Was this simply naive optimism? Or was Arthur Nightingale positioning himself as a bridge between the two most powerful magical institutions on the continent? Charlotte smiled slowly as the possibilities took shape in her mind. Perhaps young Arthur was more politically astute than she'd given him credit for. Perhaps his naive suggestion contained more wisdom than she'd initially recognized. The Tower of Magic and the Creighton family were indeed bitter rivals. But they were also the two most advanced magical research organizations in the world. And Arthur Nightingale was quickly becoming indispensable to both of them. Chapter 545. Goldrank Guild. 4. Arthur returned from the Tower of Magic like a storm wrapped in composure, serene on the surface, but carrying the electric charge of something momentous in his wake. The partnership contract lay before us on the guild hall table. The entire room fell silent when he placed it down, the weight of what it represented settling over us like a heavy blanket. Even Elias, who had spent decades cultivating an expression of perpetual mild interest, looked genuinely stunned. His weathered hands traced the tower's official seal with something approaching awe. But me, I felt no surprise at all. This was Arthur, the same person who had once faced down a bishop of the Order of the Fallen Flame to save me, not because it was strategically sound or tactically wise, but because he had decided I was worth protecting. Of course he had achieved this. To him, it was likely just another objective completed, another seemingly impossible goal made reality through sheer determination and brilliance. While the rest of the world would spend days trying to understand how he had secured such an unprecedented partnership, I had thrown myself into mastering the sword technique he had gifted me, the Martial King's Grade 6 art. A gift, he had called it casually. I knew it was far more than that. True gifts were simple things, given freely without expectation. This was a piece of legendary history, wrapped in purpose and heavy with the weight of countless warriors who had wielded it before me. It was knowledge that should have been beyond my reach, handed to someone who had no inherent right to possess it. But I practiced anyway, hour after hour, day after day, because it was all I could do to keep pace with the person he was becoming. And somewhere in those endless repetitions, somewhere between sweat and determination, I realized that what I felt for Arthur had evolved beyond simple admiration. It had begun that way, certainly. Admiration, reverence. He was brilliant beyond measure, and I had eyes to see it. He was strong in ways that mattered, and I had memories of what his strength had protected. He possessed a kindness that remained gentle in a world where gentleness was often mistaken for weakness, and Arthur was never weak. But admiration was a safe emotion, distant and respectful. What had grown in its place was something far more dangerous. Love, the quiet, insistent kind that arrives uninvited and refuses to leave, the kind that transforms how you see everything. I looked at him now as he explained the contract's implications to Elias and Callie. Those piercing blue eyes that always seemed to contain depths of knowledge and purpose beyond his years. His face, sharpened by trials and responsibility, yet somehow retaining traces of the person who had first saved me. The way he moved with unconscious grace, as if the world naturally adjusted to accommodate his presence. The way his hand would linger just a moment longer than necessary when he ruffled my hair in that fond, protective gesture I had come to treasure. I wanted that closeness, that warmth, that absolute certainty of belonging beside him. I wanted all of him, his attention, his trust, his heart. And Callie, perceptive as always, had noticed the change in me before I could fully acknowledge it myself. She had approached me with her characteristic directness, stating observations like facts rather than accusations. She hadn't been cruel about it, simply matter-of-fact in that way that made her both invaluable and occasionally infuriating. I had wanted to deny it, but Callie was rarely wrong about such things. Because wanting Arthur was the easy part. The difficult truth was questioning whether I had any right to want him at all. Everything I possessed, everything I had become, existed because of him. My training, my strength, my purpose in this world, all of it traced back to his intervention in my life. I had been saved by his decisive action, taught through his patient guidance, elevated by his unwavering belief in my potential. Even my gift, once nothing more than a curse that isolated me in silence, had found meaning and direction because he had shown me how to use it constructively. So how could I approach him as an equal when I still stood firmly in the shadow of everything he had made possible? How could I offer my heart when my very existence as a free person was his creation? The questions plagued me, but they also drove me forward. Every day of training with the Martial King's technique, every moment spent honing the skills he had given me the opportunity to develop, brought me closer to an answer I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. All I knew with certainty was that I needed to find a way to stand beside him, not because he had pulled me to that position, but because I had earned the right to be there. Should give us significant advantages in resource acquisition and magical research development, Arthur was saying, his voice pulling me back to the present conversation. Elias shook his head slowly, still processing the magnitude of what Arthur had accomplished. Partnership with the Tower of Magic. At your age, with a guild barely 2 years old, he trailed off, seeming to search for adequate words. It's unprecedented. It's strategic, Arthur replied simply. We provide capabilities they need. They provide resources and access we require. Both parties benefit substantially from the arrangement. And we add Creighton family as well after I go negotiate with them. Callie leaned back in her chair, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And here I thought today would be boring. She stood, stretching languidly. Well, this has been educational, but I have reports to file and contacts to update. The information networks will want to know about this development immediately. Elias rose as well, still clutching the contract as if it might disappear. I should begin reviewing the operational implications. This level of partnership will require significant organizational adjustments. Within minutes, they had both departed, leaving Arthur and me alone in the guild hall. The afternoon light streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the room, creating an atmosphere of quiet intimacy that made my heart race. Arthur turned his attention to me, those perceptive blue eyes studying my face with the kind of focus that always made me feel simultaneously seen and transparent. You've been unusually quiet today, Reika. Is something troubling you? This was the moment I had been both anticipating and dreading. The opportunity one had been unconsciously preparing for through weeks of internal debate and self-examination. Arthur, I began, then stopped, taking a breath to steady myself. My violet eyes met his directly, drawing strength from the flower-shaped patterns that marked them as unique, that reminded me I was more than just another person saved by his kindness. I need to tell you something important. He settled into a chair across from me, giving me his complete attention in that way that made everything else fade into background noise.
I'm listening.
I love you, I said simply, the words carrying the weight of months of realization and acceptance. Not as a benefactor or a savior or a mentor, though you've been all of those things. I love you as a woman loves a man she wants to stand beside for the rest of her life. Arthur's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features before settling into something more complex. Consideration mixed with what might have been concern. But, I continued before he could respond, I also understand that love alone isn't sufficient. I know what I am, Arthur. Everything I have, everything I've become, exists because you made it possible. My freedom, my training, my purpose. All of it stems from your intervention in my life. I stood, moving to kneel before his chair in a gesture that felt both natural and necessary. I'm not worthy of your love as an equal. Not yet. I haven't earned that right through my own achievements, my own strength, my own choices made independently of your influence. Arthur leaned forward, his hand reaching toward me, but I held up my own to forestall his response. So I want to offer you something else, I said, my voice growing stronger with conviction. I want to serve you officially, not as someone you saved, not as a guild member following orders, but as your sword, your devoted blade, wielded by someone who chooses to dedicate her strength to your purposes because she believes in you completely. The flower patterns in my violet eyes seemed to shimmer with inner light as I spoke, reflecting the depth of my commitment. I will become worthy of standing as your equal eventually. I will earn that right through dedication and achievement and growth that comes from my own will. But until that day comes, let me serve you as your devoted weapon. Arthur's breath caught slightly, and I could see him processing the implications of what I was offering. Not just service, but absolute dedication from someone who understood exactly what that meant. If you'll accept me, I said, allowing happiness to color my voice for the first time since beginning this conversation, I would be honored to call you master. The word hung between us, heavy with promise and possibility, marking the beginning of something that would reshape the dynamics between us in ways neither of us could fully anticipate. Chapter 546. An Ice Flower 1. Seraphina swung her sword in a graceful arc, the air around her shimmering with the bloom of snow plum blossoms that erupted from the blade's tip. The blossoms spiraled toward her uncle with an elegant yet lethal precision. Lee countered effortlessly, his sword rising to meet her attack with a practiced fluidity. The clash of blades echoed like distant thunder in the quiet courtyard. Seraphina furrowed her brows, stepping back to regroup before launching another strike. This time, the blossoms carried a violet hue, suffused with the power of the violet mist divine art, a grade 6 technique of the Mount Hua sect. The movement was aptly named Violet Sunset Genesis. Lee's sword met the attack head-on, the blossoms dissipating as his blade held firm. He smiled, nodding in approval. "You've improved, Sarah," he said sincerely, his voice warm with pride. Seraphina had grown significantly, stepping into mid-integration rank and achieving sword resonance, a feat that many would take years longer to accomplish. Not only that, but her unique evolution of Mount Hua's plum blossoms, infused with her ice mana, was already reaching the same level of refinement as Lee's own lightning-infused blossoms. It was a remarkable accomplishment, especially given the vast difference in their levels. "She's a genius," Lee thought, his eyes gleaming with admiration. At this pace, Seraphina could very well achieve ascendant rank before even Sunday. This generation was shaping up to be unparalleled, their talents so extraordinary they would leave their predecessors in the dust. It was a future Lee looked forward to witnessing. As the bout ended, an attendant approached Seraphina, handing her a towel. She wiped the sweat from her brow, her crystalline blue eyes thoughtful. "Uncle," she began, her voice soft yet purposeful. "Yes, Sarah?" Lee replied, his tone as fond as ever. Seraphina hesitated for a moment, clutching the towel tightly. "For my birthday," she said, her words quiet but steady. I want to share that moment with Arthur." Lee froze for a brief second before exhaling deeply, his expression unreadable. He didn't need her to elaborate. She was growing up, stepping into a new stage of life and love. It was a moment both inevitable and bittersweet. He smiled at her, nodding with quiet understanding. "Then, Sarah, make sure it's a day you'll both remember." Then, "Father." Seraphina began hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. Lee's face scrunched at the mention, his usual warmth giving way to a flicker of unease. The relationship between Mo Zenith and Seraphina was as fractured as glass, a bond riddled with cracks that neither seemed willing or perhaps able to mend. Mo Zenith loved his daughter fiercely, of that Lee was certain. But love without action, without expression, was like a blade left sheathed. It failed to fulfill its purpose. Mo's heart was consumed, not by indifference, but by an unrelenting drive. And now, on the front lines of the war against the vampires, Mo was the East's bulwark, the very reason it hadn't fallen entirely to chaos. Yet his presence on the battlefield only deepened the void between him and Seraphina. Lee sighed, his hand tightening into a fist. He had always been aware of the misunderstandings between his niece and brother, but he had deliberately kept his distance. It wasn't his place, or so he told himself. He wasn't particularly close to Mo, not as brothers should be, and that distance made him hesitant to intervene in a matter so personal. I wish my idiot brother could just be honest with her, Lee thought, frustration flickering in his eyes. He understood Mo's silence, even if he didn't condone it. The two of them had been raised as princes of Mount Hua, bearing the weight of its traditions and pride. Mount Hua's legacy was etched into their very beings, and Mo carried it more zealously than anyone. To him, Mount Hua was not just a home. It was a cause, a mantle of perfection that demanded unwavering dedication. And that pride had been shattered. Years ago, Magnus Drakkar had utterly crushed Mo Zenith, not just through sheer rank and power, but by dismantling the very techniques that defined Mount Hua. Magnus had trampled the sect's proudest art, its most exalted technique, with a precision that was almost surgical. It was a humiliation that burned brighter than any wound, and Mo had never recovered from it. That humiliation consumed him. It drove him, sharpening his focus into an obsession. To surpass Magnus Drakkar, to reclaim the honor he felt he had lost. That was why he had adopted son Zenith. Mo wasn't just searching for redemption for himself. He was hunting for talent. For someone who could carry the torch of Mount Hua's legacy and burn brighter than even its past glories. But in his relentless pursuit, Mo had pushed Seraphina further away. He had buried his love for her beneath layers of duty and pride, until all she could see was the man who seemed too distant, too cold. Lee exhaled, his gaze softening as he looked at Seraphina. She didn't say anything more about her father, but her unspoken words hung heavy in the air. If only Mo could see her, truly see her, not as a part of Mount Hua's future, but as his daughter. "He loves you, Sarah," Lee said at last, his tone gentle but firm. "He just doesn't know how to show it." Seraphina's lips pressed into a thin line, and she said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. "You should think about Arthur, Sarah," Lee said, smoothly steering the conversation to safer waters. Seraphina's expression brightened immediately, her lips curling into a smile that could have melted the frost on the plum blossoms. Lee chuckled softly to himself. His niece, usually as stoic as a mountain in winter, wore her heart on her sleeve whenever Arthur Nightingale's name was mentioned. Lee didn't share the apprehension of others when it came to Arthur marrying multiple women of power. In the Eastern continent, such arrangements were more common, especially among figures of great prominence and power. But more than tradition, what made Lee so accepting was the man himself. Arthur Nightingale wasn't just some brash, ambitious youth. He was the kind of man who, when he made a promise, would cleave through mountains to keep it. In Lee's eyes, Arthur had already proven himself many times over. He had been there for Seraphina when she was at her most vulnerable, healing the wounds no one else could see. He had stood by her, shielded her, and brought out a side of her that even Lee hadn't known existed. Arthur wasn't merely protective. He was strong, a rare talent whose potential seemed boundless. Yet for all his strength, his humility and unwavering loyalty to Seraphina set him apart. Lee had no doubt that Arthur would move heaven and earth for her, and that was all he needed to know. Perfect, Lee thought with a quiet nod. There's nothing about that boy I dislike. But then, a mischievous glint sparked in his eye as another thought struck him. That doesn't mean I'll make it easy for him when the time comes to propose. He smiled darkly, a stark contrast to his usual warmth. It was the kind of smile that sent chills down the spines of his disciples. As much as he admired Arthur, Lee also believed in the importance of tradition. A prospective husband for Seraphina, a princess of the Zenith family of Mount Hua sect and Lee's cherished niece, should have to earn his blessing in the most spectacular fashion. After all, a good master doesn't simply hand things over. He makes his students sweat, stumble, and triumph. And if that meant making Arthur's proposal a tad more challenging, so be it. "Seraphina," he said, his tone light and teasing, "do you think Arthur has what it takes to convince me?" Her gaze sharpened, but the corners of her lips twitched upward. "Uncle, you know he does." Lee laughed heartily, his hands resting on his hips. "Good answer, Sarah. But let's see if he can prove it when the time comes." Chapter 547. An Ice Flower, 2. Mo's silver eyes narrowed as a faint sigh escaped his lips. The air around him shimmered with the raw power of astral energy, his sword radiating a brilliance that seemed to pierce the very fabric of the night. The energy, magnified further by the mastery of sword unity, rippled outward as he swung his blade in a sweeping arc. From its tip, ethereal plum blossoms unfurled, glowing with a spectral light as they cleaved through the battlefield, slicing space and his enemies alike into nothingness. For Mo Zenith, this was routine, a grim dance of destruction he had perfected over countless battles. The vampires, bolstered by centuries of battle-hardened experience, were far more formidable than the warriors of the East at the same rank. And so, it fell to Mo, one of the Eastern continent's greatest champions, to stem their advance and ensure the East held its ground. Yet tonight there was something different in the way his sword moved. Each strike carried a barely perceptible urgency, the kind of desperation that made even the mighty seem human. His normally precise, deliberate attacks had taken on a new rhythm, frantic, swift, as though the battlefield itself were an obstacle to be cleared rather than a foe to be conquered. The moonlight cascaded over his silver hair, turning it into a glowing beacon as he cut through the throng of vampires and cultists. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, but Mo's mind was elsewhere, far removed from the carnage unfolding around him. "I have to return in time for her birthday," he thought, the words steady in his mind but charged with emotion. For all his glacial composure, for all the cold, distant authority he exuded as one of the kings of the East, Mo Zenith was now driven by a singular, deeply personal mission, to be there for his daughter's 18th birthday. The same Mo Zenith, who seemed carved from the heart of a glacier, his silver eyes as unyielding as frost, was racing against the tide of darkness not for glory, nor duty, but for something far more fragile: family. The plum blossoms bloomed brighter with every strike, their radiant petals carving a path of destruction through the army before him. His movements were a storm, deliberate yet relentless, each swing of his blade an echo of the urgency in his heart. No one on the battlefield would have guessed the source of his uncharacteristic haste. But Mo Zenith, for all his stoicism, knew only one thing mattered tonight. He would finish this fight, and then he would return to Seraphina. "Well done, sect leader." One of the masters of the Mount Hua sect greeted Mo Zenith with a deep bow. The elder carried himself with the solemnity of a high immortal rank warrior, his tone laden with respect. Mo gave a curt nod, his silver eyes glinting under the faint glow of the displays before him. No words escaped his lips, but the icy demeanor was nothing new. The frigid responses of Mo Zenith were as much a hallmark of his leadership as his unmatched swordsmanship. "What's the situation now?" he asked, his voice cutting through the air like the edge of his blade as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Archduke Astoria and his forces have carved deeply into enemy territory," a master reported. "With his help, we can significantly reduce our presence here without risking the Eastern Front." "Good," Mo replied, his tone sharp and decisive. "I'll be returning then." The gathered masters exchanged glances, their surprise muted but palpable. One of them, bolder than the rest, dared to ask, "Returning?" "Yes," Mo said, his gaze steady as it swept over the holographic displays showing the fluid movements of armies across the Eastern continent. "It's Seraphina's coming-of-age ceremony." The room fell quiet at his words. This declaration from a man who embodied duty above all else felt like a rare fracture in his glacial persona. "Is Sun returning as well?" Mo asked, breaking the silence. "His Highness mentioned his intent to push forward," one of the masters answered, "to carve a path through enemy lines until he reaches the Kagu family's stronghold." Mo's lips pressed into a thin line, his expression softening just enough to betray a flicker of pride. "Tell him to be careful," he said. The thought of Sun Zenith, his adopted son, brought a brief warmth to his otherwise stoic demeanor. At only 22 years old, Sun had already reached low immortal rank, a feat that placed him among the brightest of his generation. Mo's pride was unspoken but evident in the slight lift of his chin and the faintest glint in his silver eyes. "Prepare the transport," Mo ordered, his attention returning to the displays. His work here was far from over, but duty to family, for once, would take precedence over the battlefield. If Mo Zenith was in a rush, he could have simply cut through space and made his way directly to Mount Hua Sect, alone and unimpeded. Yet he chose not to. Not because his heart trembled faintly at the thought of his daughter turning 18, of course not. Seated in the back of a sleek, luxurious car, gliding through various warp gates that spanned the eastern continent, Mo let out a long breath. The quiet hum of the engine was a faint counterpoint to the maelstrom of thoughts in his mind. She has grown up so much, Mo mused silently, a rare, fleeting smile softening the sharp edges of his expression. It felt like yesterday when Seraphina had entered his world, small and fragile, yet somehow overwhelming. Back then, he was not the sect leader, not yet a king, not even a radiant rank. He was simply the heir of Mount Hua, bound to duty and engaged to the icy and distant princess of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Duty had been the foundation of his life then, an unyielding pillar. Love, as others described it, seemed abstract, unnecessary. So, when news of the pregnancy came, Mo's concerns were purely practical. Was the child healthy? Was the lineage secure? And then Seraphina was born. He remembered the moment vividly, as if etched into the fabric of his very being. The way he had stepped into the room, expecting to feel nothing but a sense of responsibility. Yet, the instant his eyes fell on her, something within him unraveled. The tiny infant, swaddled and impossibly delicate, stirred something far greater than duty. It was love, absolute, overwhelming, and irrevocable. Seraphina had become his world. Even though he never truly loved her mother, that absence had no bearing on the bond he forged with his daughter. Every moment with her had been a revelation, every milestone etched in the amber of his mind. Mo reached into his coat pocket and retrieved his phone, navigating instinctively to the photo gallery. His fingers found the album titled Seraphina, and there it was, a treasure trove of memories, tens of thousands of pictures. Her first yawn, her first steps, the moment her tiny fingers had wrapped around his thumb. Her first sword swing, captured in a series of blurred shots because he had been too excited to hold the camera steady. A faint chuckle escaped his lips as he scrolled through. There was the time she had climbed onto his desk during a council meeting, declaring that she would protect Mount Hua better than father ever could. She couldn't have been older than 5. The smile lingered as he paused on a more recent photo, Seraphina, standing proudly in her training garb, her crystalline blue eyes sharp with determination. That same fierce resolve had been there since she was a child, but now, it burned brighter than ever. Closing the gallery, Mo leaned back in his seat. His hand rested briefly on the hilt of his sword, a subtle habit he had developed over decades. The journey to Mount Hua was not a long one, but for the first time in years, Mo found himself impatient. This wasn't just any birthday. It was her coming-of-age ceremony, a pivotal moment that would mark her transition from the girl he had raised to the woman she was becoming. The thought filled him with pride, tinged with a bittersweet ache. Seraphina, he murmured, the name rolling off his tongue like a prayer. For her, he would cleave through any obstacle, cross any battlefield, and bear any burden. For her, the world could burn, and he would stand unshaken. The car passed through the final warp gate, and the towering peaks of Mount Hua came into view. Mo's silver eyes gleamed with quiet determination. Whatever awaited him, whether the joy of her celebration or the trials of leadership, he was ready. After all, for Seraphina he always would be. Chapter 548. An Ice Flower, 3. When the day of Seraphina's 18th birthday finally arrived, Mo Zenith couldn't take his eyes off his daughter. She seemed radiant, as if her very presence had the power to light up the grand halls of Mount Hua. Her smile was bright, a rare and beautiful departure from her usual composed demeanor. Her dress was a masterpiece of design, a flowing blue gown that shimmered like frost under moonlight. It framed her silver hair, cascading down her shoulders, and brought out the icy brilliance of her blue eyes, a gift from her late mother. Adorning her was a platinum tiara that rested regally upon her head, paired with a sapphire necklace and earrings that glinted with every turn of her head. Mo's heart swelled, a complicated mix of emotions tugging at him. She was no longer the little girl he once held in his arms, but a young woman standing confidently in her own light. The thought filled him with both pride and a quiet ache. Watching her grow up was like witnessing the passing of seasons, beautiful but inevitable. But as Serafina's gaze flicked toward him briefly before turning away, Mo's chest tightened. She didn't linger, didn't smile at him like she did at others. He sighed inwardly. "Father," Serafina said, her voice calm but tinged with anticipation. "We need to pick up Arthur first." Mo nodded slowly, pushing his thoughts aside as he walked beside her. There's an old saying that no father truly likes his daughter's boyfriend. For Mo, this sentiment rang particularly true. It wasn't that he disliked Arthur. It was simply that he found himself scrutinizing the boy more closely than he would anyone else. "She's happy. That's what matters," Mo told himself. And yet, it didn't ease the knot in his chest as he followed her to Arthur's room. The modern door slid open with a faint hiss to reveal Arthur, standing impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. He was calm, poised, and every bit the gentleman. Mo had to admit, begrudgingly, that the boy carried himself well. "Greetings, Your Majesty," Arthur said, bowing respectfully. His voice was steady, and he met Mo's gaze without faltering. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. Mo inclined his head in acknowledgement, his own expression unreadable. However, his attention was quickly drawn to Serafina. Her cheeks had turned a faint shade of red, and her smile grew even wider as she took Arthur's arm. Mo let out a quiet sigh, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer before they began their walk toward the grand hall. She doesn't need to see it. She just needs to feel it, he thought. But the ache in his chest didn't lessen. The sound of enchanted strings filled the hall as I led Serafina to the center of the floor. Her hand rested lightly in mine, her ice-blue eyes meeting my gaze with unwavering confidence. There was no hesitation in her expression, no trace of nervousness. This was Serafina Zenith, proud, radiant, and entirely my equal in this moment. I guided her into the first steps of the waltz, and we moved together as though we had rehearsed for years. Her dress shimmered with every turn, a river of silver and blue that seemed to reflect the light of the chandeliers above. Every movement she made was deliberate yet effortless, and I couldn't help but admire her. "You look stunning tonight," I said softly, letting my words carry between us as I spun her. Her lips curved into a teasing smile. "And you look acceptable," she replied, a mischievous glint in her eye. "But don't get used to compliments, Arthur. I still plan on defeating you in our next spar." I chuckled, leaning closer as I matched her steps. I wouldn't have it any other way. The music carried us further across the floor, her every step deliberate yet fluid. As we danced, she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "Father's still glaring at you, isn't he?" I cast a brief glance toward the edge of the hall, where Mo Zenith stood, a monument of stoic intensity. Glaring? Not quite. Contemplating how to best make my life difficult? Absolutely. Serafina let out a soft laugh, the sound both sharp and melodic. "Don't mind him. He doesn't care about things like this." There was a slight edge to her tone, a bitterness carefully veiled beneath her usual composure. "He's more worried about his legacy than his daughter." I tightened my grip on her hand slightly, just enough to let her know I heard her. "That's not true." She glanced up at me, her sapphire gaze flickering with something unspoken before she shrugged, her expression smoothing over again. "It doesn't matter. I've learned not to expect much." I wanted to push further, to tell her she was wrong, but now wasn't the time. Instead, I spun her gently, letting the music fill the momentary silence between us. When she returned to my arms, I spoke quietly. My words meant just for her. You mean more to him than you think. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she glanced away briefly. If that's true, he has a strange way of showing it. There was so much I wanted to say, but I held it back. Instead, I smiled faintly. Well, I'm here for you. Her steps slowed just slightly, her eyes meeting mine again. There was a softness there, a flicker of vulnerability she rarely showed. You always are. As the music began to draw to a close, Serafina leaned in closer, her silver hair brushing lightly against my cheek. Thank you for being here, Arthur. Always, I said simply, the word carrying more weight than I expected. For you? Always. A flicker of warmth passed through her gaze, and she leaned in closer, her voice dropping into an intimate whisper. I'll need you later as well. My heart gave a small jolt at her words, though I kept my expression steady. Will that include another one of those awkward lunches with your father? Lunch? Not breakfast? She countered smoothly, one brow arching with a perfect blend of challenge and amusement. Well, I doubt we'll wake up early enough for breakfast, I teased, grinning as a faint flush rose to her usually pale cheeks. Her usual composure faltered for just a moment before she leaned in even closer, her lips brushing against my ear. I'll find out tonight, Arthur. The warmth of her breath and the weight of her words sent a spark through me, but she wasn't finished. And yes, you should have lunch with my father if you want to marry me. Necessary sacrifices and all that, even if you don't see eye to eye. I let out a slow breath, my grin softening into something more genuine. I know. Anything for you. Her blush deepened, and for the briefest moment, Serafina's usual poise gave way to something delicate and entirely hers. I committed that moment to memory, knowing it was rare and precious, a gift only she could give. After dancing with Serafina, I moved seamlessly to Rachel and Cecilia, sharing the same familiar rhythm that had become second nature to us all. Their laughter and warmth filled the air, but my focus kept wandering elsewhere. I found my gaze repeatedly drifting toward Mo Zenith. From an outsider's perspective, he looked every bit the part of a king, a towering figure of authority, command, and unyielding strength. But I could see the cracks beneath the polished exterior. The shadows in his silver eyes betrayed a truth that few dared to acknowledge. Mo Zenith was a king in decline. His once unshakable aura was now haunted by inner demons he couldn't banish. His relentless drive for strength, fueled by an inferiority complex, had consumed him. The Mount Hua sect's most prized grade 6 art, Violet Mist Divine Art, was his obsession, an obsession born from the humiliation of being utterly outclassed by Magnus Dracar. No matter how much he pushed himself, he couldn't match Magnus' mastery. That failure had eaten away at him. In his desperation, Mo turned inward, devoting himself entirely to refining his art. But this fixation came at a cost. He neglected everything else, his leadership of Mount Hua, his duties as a king, and worst of all, his relationship with Serafina. As I sipped my drink, I recalled what would happen in the novel. Mo's negligence created a vacuum of power within Mount Hua, one that Sun Zenith, a prodigiously talented yet utterly corrupt adopted son, was all too eager to fill. Sun systematically rallied the masters and elders to his side, eroding Mo's authority bit by bit. And Serafina? She became a target for Sun's hatred, a living reminder of the Zenith bloodline he could never truly claim as his own. In the novel, Sun's greed culminated in an unthinkable betrayal. He plotted to kidnap Serafina and sell her to the Wudong sect, reducing her to a mere tool for her immense talent. But that was where Lucifer came in. Lucifer Windward's march up Mount Hua became legend. At low immortal rank, alongside his father Arden Windward, Lucifer scaled the mountain and laid waste to the corrupted sect. It was a feat of unparalleled might and determination. Together, they uprooted the cancer within Mount Hua, annihilating all who had betrayed its principles. Lucifer himself faced Sun Zenith, who had ascended to peak immortal rank. It was during that climactic battle that Lucifer, pushed to his absolute limits, finally bonded with the legendary grade sword his father had gifted him. The duel was fierce, but Lucifer triumphed, marking one of the greatest victories of his life. But the cost was devastating. Mount Hua was left in ruins, its power diminished beyond recognition, and its reputation tarnished by the corruption that had festered within. I didn't want history to repeat itself. I set my glass down, determination hardening in my chest. If I could act now, if I could guide Mo away from his self-destructive path, perhaps I could save Mount Hua from that fate. The sect deserved better, and Seraphina deserved a father who would stand beside her, not one consumed by shadows. Mo caught my gaze briefly, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his silver eyes before he turned away. "Arthur, are you all right?" Seraphina's soft voice pulled me back to the present. She stood by my side, her sapphire eyes filled with quiet concern. I smiled at her, letting her presence ground me. "Just thinking, Sarah, about you, about your future." Her cheeks flushed faintly, but she didn't press further. Instead, she slipped her hand into mine, her touch a silent reminder of why I couldn't let this world fall apart the way it had in the novel. Not for her, not for anyone. If I could rewrite destiny, I would. And it would start here. Chapter 551. An Ice Flower, 6. The early morning light filtered softly through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room. Arthur stirred, his gaze falling on Seraphina as she slept peacefully beside him. Her serene expression, free of the weight she so often carried, was a sight he found himself unwilling to disturb. Her silver hair spilled over the pillow like moonlight, and her breathing was soft and even. Rising quietly, Arthur moved to the window, the events of the night still fresh in his mind but overshadowed by thoughts of what lay ahead. The road before him was fraught with challenges, each more daunting than the last. The Tower of Alchemy, an ancient institution shrouded in mystery and rife with opportunity, loomed as the first major hurdle. Beyond that, the civil war brewing within the Slatemark Empire threatened to upend the delicate balance of power. And then, of course, there was Mount Hua itself, a sanctuary under siege both literally and figuratively as its legacy was tested against the growing shadows. Arthur exhaled deeply, his hand gripping his phone, as if seeking solace in its familiar weight. These weren't just trials to survive. They were opportunities to shape the future, to ensure that the world he was building alongside the people he cared for would endure. He glanced back at Seraphina, a small smile forming on his lips. She was one of the reasons he fought so fiercely, and he would face whatever came next with unrelenting determination. She stirred slowly, her movements as graceful as a fairy emerging from slumber. Her ice-blue eyes blinked open, and she stretched her arms above her head before wincing, her serene expression twisting into one of mild irritation. "Beast," she muttered, her cheeks faintly flushed. Arthur couldn't help but chuckle as she slid out of bed, gathering the sheets around herself in an almost theatrical attempt at modesty as she walked toward the bathroom. "Do you really need to cover yourself?" he teased, his grin widening. Seraphina paused in the doorway, her lips curling into a small, mischievous smile. "You'll want me more if I don't." With that, she disappeared into the bathroom, though Arthur noticed her movements were slightly stiffer than usual. Still, she bore it better than Rachel or Cecilia, likely due to her rigorous training as a swordsman, which had honed her body to withstand far greater strains. Arthur turned on his phone, his eyebrows shooting up as he saw the time. 3 in the afternoon. He let out a low whistle before setting the device aside. They'd lost all sense of time, it seemed. After both of them had dressed and cleaned up, it was time for a belated lunch with none other than Mo Zenith, the celestial dragon of Mount Hua sect. Unlike Li or Seraphina, Mo's swordsmanship leaned heavily on tradition. His style wove together wind, water, and earth mana into plum blossoms of breathtaking beauty and devastating precision. Arthur couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervous anticipation at meeting the formidable figure again. The dining hall was an elegant blend of modern simplicity and timeless grandeur, its high ceilings adorned with intricate carvings of plum blossoms. At the far end of the room, Mo sat at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the light like molten starlight. Beside him was Lee, his ever-cheerful demeanor lighting up the room. Lee's face brightened further as he saw Arthur and Serafina enter. "Well, there they are," he said warmly, gesturing for them to join. "I trust you two had a restful morning." Arthur caught the knowing gleam in Lee's eye and cleared his throat, doing his best to maintain composure. Serafina, for her part, simply rolled her eyes and took the seat next to her uncle, her expression returning to its usual cool calm. Mo's sharp gaze flicked briefly between Arthur and Serafina before settling on Arthur. His expression was inscrutable, but his presence was as commanding as ever. "Let's eat," Mo said, his tone as brisk and direct as his swordsmanship. Arthur nodded, slipping into his seat beside Serafina. Despite the celestial dragon's imposing aura, there was a faint trace of warmth in his voice, just enough to hint at the pride and affection he kept tightly guarded. It was, after all, his daughter's coming-of-age day, and even the sharpest blades softened at the sight of blooming plum blossoms. "You have found yourself a good man, Serafina?" Mo Zenith said, his voice as calm and unyielding as a mountain's shadow at dusk. His eyes, cold as the northern winds yet glinting with a reluctant approval, rested on Arthur Nightingale. The young man stood steady beneath that gaze, an ironclad serenity etched into his posture. Mo Zenith was not a man to dispense praise lightly. His heart, though fiercely devoted to his daughter, was tempered by the weight of his station and the wisdom of countless battles fought, both on the battlefield and in the halls of power. Yet here stood Arthur Nightingale, a paradox of youthful vigor and ancient strength, an heir to greatness who bore its weight as if born to the burden. And Mo found he could not fault him. Not truly. Not for his talent, nor his demeanor. There was, however, one thing that soured his disposition. A flaw not of Arthur's making, but one carved into the older man's heart by years of disdain. Arthur was the disciple of him.
Magnus Draekar.
Mo's jaw tightened imperceptibly, and his thoughts strayed to the past, where his clashes with Draekar had burned as fiercely as the sun upon a desert plain. It was a rivalry forged in the fires of ambition, pride, and principles too unyielding to bend. Magnus had died, but before that had reached a level Mo didn't even have hope of reaching. Arthur Nightingale was, after all, a luminary in his own right, a flame so brilliant it threatened to overshadow even the Zenith name. They called him the future paragon of humanity, even above Lucifer, a title bestowed lightly by none, but it was not the title that gave Mo pause. It was the epithet whispered in hushed tones across the empire. Zenith Blade, a name meant for the one destined to scale the wall and claim the mantle of ascendant rank. Mo studied Arthur again, his gaze narrowing. How could he not wonder? How could anyone not wonder? What manner of man could best Nolan Wright, the vice-captain of the 2nd Division of the Imperial Knights, a peak ascendant rank warrior, no less? The feat was no secret. It had spread like wildfire, igniting awe and speculation in equal measure. He is a talent that burns brighter than even the sun, Mo thought, his inner voice tinged with both awe and wariness. Sun Zenith, Mo's adopted son and the most luminous name in his family's history, had achieved ascendant rank at the youngest age ever recorded. To surpass him would be unthinkable. And yet, Arthur Nightingale seemed poised to do just that. If the boy continued at his current pace, he would eclipse even Sun by half a year. But raw power was not what unnerved Mo. It was Arthur's relative strength, his presence. Talent without discipline was but a wildfire, dangerous and unsustainable. But Arthur was a storm, deliberate in its path, inexorable in its force. "How strong will you be when you scale the wall, Arthur Nightingale?" Mo murmured under his breath, a question meant for the wind, not for ears. Arthur would reach it. Of that Mo had no doubt. But what lay beyond for a man who could already defeat the most hardened warriors of this world? That was the question that whispered through Mo's thoughts like an unseen specter, both thrilling and foreboding. Chapter 552. An Ice Flower, 7. Mo Zenith's silver gaze bore into me, sharp and unyielding, as if he could unearth every secret I had ever buried. I held his stare, my calm a well-honed blade, and let out a measured exhale when his scrutiny softened. Approval. It was not spoken, but it was there. A fleeting spark in those metallic eyes. So far, so good. I have a gift for you, Arthur, Lee Zenith said suddenly, breaking the tension with his usual air of composed nonchalance. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he tapped his spatial ring. With a flicker of light, a scroll materialized in his hand, its parchment radiating a faint, otherworldly aura. He held it out to me, the gesture unassuming but unmistakably weighted with significance. I accepted it, unrolling the scroll carefully, aware of Seraphina leaning in beside me, her soft breath warm against my cheek as she peered at the contents. My eyes widened. Grade for art. Spectral sword. Consider it a gesture of goodwill for taking care of Seraphina. Lee explained, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. I don't need something like this to take care of Seraphina, I said, my voice steady. But I won't deny something that will benefit me. Lee's smile deepened, a glint of approval in his eyes. Perfect response, he said with a nod. That grade 4 art will help solidify your sword foundation as you form your sword heart to scale the wall. I tilted my head, curiosity flaring. Could you explain more? Lee's gaze sharpened, and he folded his arms, adopting the stance of a seasoned tutor. Of course, he said. The sword heart, as you likely suspect, is a vessel, a kind of metaphysical forge within your body. When formed, it allows you to compress mana into astral energy, provided you're using the aura method of mana management and channeling. You've studied seven-circle magic, haven't you? You know the labyrinth of calculations it requires to cast even one such spell. I nodded. The equations are staggering. Well, the sword heart achieves that same level of power, Lee said, his voice taking on a reverent tone. But without the mathematics, it is pure instinct, pure will. That's why a strong foundation is crucial. The better your swordsmanship before forming your sword heart, the greater the power you can wield once it's complete. His words hung in the air, resonating like the toll of a distant bell. The sword heart, it wasn't just a milestone. It was a transformation, a key to a higher plane of existence, one that required not just skill but understanding, not just strength but harmony. So I should spend more time developing my swordsmanship before forming my sword heart? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Kinda, Lee said, the edge of his formality slipping, revealing the sharp wit beneath. There's a limit to how far you can go without forming the sword heart. It's tied to your talent. But with your potential, he gave a wry smile, you'll master spectral sword while forming your sword heart. Seraphina's hand brushed my arm, her touch grounding me as I stared at the scroll again. The faint hum of its power seemed to echo Lee's words, promising both challenge and reward. I'll do my best, I said simply, my voice quiet but firm. Lee nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. What are you thinking of doing now, Arthur? Seraphina asked, her fingers brushing mine with a light, deliberate touch. Her expression was calm, but her ice-blue eyes held a quiet intensity that was impossible to ignore. I glanced at her, letting a small smile curve my lips before responding. Stay in Avalon, spend time with family, attend Rose's birthday. Seraphina's hand lingered on mine for a moment longer, but her grip tightened slightly as she spoke again. So, it's Rose's chance now. Her voice was calm, but the faintest tremor of disappointment, so subtle it might have been missed by anyone else, tinged her words. The serene mask she wore, so often impenetrable, seemed to crack ever so slightly. Lee, standing nearby, let out a low chuckle, breaking the tension. Ah, the tangled web of courtly politics and youthful ambition, he said, shaking his head. It's like a play unfolding before my eyes. Arthur, you might be the most interesting protagonist the world has ever seen. And you, Seraphina, well, I wouldn't count yourself out of the drama just yet. Seraphina shot him a glance, half exasperated and half amused, but said nothing. Instead, she turned her gaze back to me, her hand slipping from mine. I only hope, she said at last, her voice soft but firm, that you remember why you're doing all this, Arthur. I nodded, her words striking a chord that reverberated through me. Always. And with that, the room fell into a companionable silence, the unspoken weight of future decisions hanging between us like the final note of a song yet to be resolved. Lunch had been a quiet affair, filled with the comfortable silences that often accompanied Seraphina and me. Afterward, I decided tomorrow I would return to Avalon. But for the rest of the day, I spent time with Seraphina, savoring the unspoken bond between us. The hours slipped by like grains of sand through an open hand, and as twilight descended, I set out with purpose. To find Mo Zenith. By now, it was a foregone conclusion in most circles. I was Seraphina's future husband, and as an honorary elder of the Mount Hua sect, this status granted me access to places few dared tread. Titles carried weight here, and mine, forged by both merit and perception, opened even the most tightly guarded doors. It didn't take long to locate him. Mo Zenith stood amidst a sea of mist, his silhouette sharp against the encroaching shadows of the evening. He moved with the precision of a craftsman, his every strike carving through the air as though shaping reality itself. He was training in the Violet Mist Divine Art, a grade 6 masterpiece of Mount Hua sect, its elegance renowned, its power feared. But not by Magnus Dracar. I knew the art well. My master had not merely bested it. He had dismantled it with the brutal efficiency of a storm breaking upon a brittle cliff. Where Mo's strokes were precise and calculated, Magnus had been fluid and overwhelming, a reminder that strength was not only a matter of mana rank but also of mastery and vision. Mo must have sensed my presence. He paused, lowering his blade with a deliberateness that spoke of both control and irritation. His silver gaze met mine, sharp and unyielding. "What are you doing here?" "I've come to strike a deal," I replied, stepping forward with measured confidence. My voice carried through the mist, steady and resolute. Mo raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, waiting for me to elaborate. This was no simple visit, and we both knew it. Mount Hua's fate hung precariously in the balance, its future as doomed as a leaf caught in an unforgiving storm. But storms could be weathered, and tides turned, if one had the will and the strength to shape the outcome. I did. It was time to change the destiny of the Mount Hua sect. Chapter 553. An Ice Flower, 8. Was I nervous about what I was about to do? Yes. Beyond nervous. My heartbeat thundered in my ears like the drums of war, but I forced it down, burying it beneath the steady resolve I'd honed over years of trials. This wasn't just for me. It was for Mount Hua sect, for Seraphina, for humanity itself. There was no room for hesitation. I stepped forward, each movement deliberate as Mo Zenith's presence loomed over me, a palpable force that seemed to weigh down the very air around us. The pressure was suffocating, a manifestation of his radiant rank strength that pressed against my soul like the weight of mountains. For most below the wall, it would have been crushing, forcing them to their knees in abject surrender. But I was beyond that now. I had not yet scaled the wall to reach ascendant rank, but my strength stood above it nonetheless. And if Mo Zenith expected me to falter, he would be sorely disappointed. "What kind of deal?" he asked, his voice sharp and cold as a blade drawn in winter. His silver gaze pinned me in place, a test of my will as much as his words were a challenge to my courage. I drew a breath, steadying myself against the storm of his attention. The moment stretched unbearably, but finally, I spoke with conviction that surprised even me. "I will elevate the grade 6 art of Mount Hua sect by creating a fifth movement." The world seemed to twist and bend around me, the weight of my audacity crashing down like a tidal wave. The very air bristled with latent power, and for a moment, it felt as though reality itself held its breath. Then it came, a sword, a massive, phantom blade that descended from the heavens, sharp and merciless, a projection of Mo Zenith's killing intent made manifest. It was not just a threat but a judgment, honed by countless battles and tempered in the crucible of his experience as one of humanity's greatest warriors. The sword's edge bore down on me, a promise of death should I falter or prove unworthy. Luna stirred within me, her presence flickering like a flame sensing mortal danger. She nearly emerged, her instinct to protect me overwhelming her usual restraint. But I held her back with iron will, refusing to show weakness. This was my battle, my stand to make. I did not move. Sweat beaded on my brow and trickled down my cheek, but I remained still, my face impassive as stone. The phantom sword struck, crashing into me with the weight of worlds, but it did not break me. I stood, unyielding, as his killing intent coiled around me like living serpents, testing, probing, searching for any crack in my resolve. And then it was gone, dissipating as swiftly as it had come. Mo Zenith's lips curled into a sardonic smile, his eyes narrowing with something that might have been approval or contempt. "How daring, boy," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you think that just because my daughter likes you, I won't kill you where you stand?" His words carried the weight of absolute authority, a ruler in his own right who commanded respect through power that few could comprehend. Despite everything, I could not deny the truth of his strength. In this moment, I was still far from his level. If he wished, he could end me with a casual gesture, my boldness nothing more than an amusing insult to his station. But I met his gaze with unwavering determination. This wasn't about pride, nor was it about youthful defiance. It was necessity, an act born of desperation and unshakable hope for the future. Mo Zenith studied me for a long moment, then spoke with quiet intensity. "Your master, Magnus. He reached the heights of high radiant rank before his death. I knew him, boy. I witnessed his power firsthand. His silver eyes seemed to pierce through me. Magnus could reshape battlefields with a thought, command the very elements to his will, stand against armies and emerge victorious. He was the closest thing to a demigod walking among mortals." The mention of my master sent a pang through my chest, memories of Magnus' incredible abilities flooding back. The way he could manipulate reality itself, how his presence alone could turn the tide of wars, the absolute authority he wielded over magical forces that lesser mages couldn't even comprehend. Even after witnessing that level of power, Mo continued, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Even after Magnus himself demonstrated what it means to transcend mortal limitations and approach the realm of gods. Do you still believe you can surpass that? Do you truly think you can climb higher than a man who stood among the greatest in human history? The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. This was the crux of it. Not just whether I believed I could grow strong, but whether I could surpass someone who had already achieved the seemingly impossible. Currently, I am too weak to even hope to accomplish something like this, I admitted, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was claiming. Honesty was not weakness here. It was the foundation upon which audacious promises were built. But yes, I will surpass Magnus. I will surpass everyone. Mo Zenith's eyes widened, the faintest flicker of genuine surprise breaking through his usually impenetrable facade. He had not expected such absolute conviction, such unwavering certainty in the face of what seemed impossible. I will not just be the paragon of humanity in this generation, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I will become the second hero in the history of this world. I will reach heights that even Magnus could only dream of, and I will use that power to protect everything that matters. The declaration echoed in the mist around us, carrying weight that seemed to bend reality itself. Mo Zenith stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Part incredulity, part calculation, part something that might have been awe. The second hero, he repeated slowly, tasting the words. You understand what you're claiming? The first hero reshaped the very foundations of this world, established the systems of power that govern all magical advancement, created legends that have endured for millennia. You're saying you will equal that? I'm saying I will surpass it, I replied without hesitation. Magnus showed me what was possible at the peak of Radiant rank. But there are heights beyond even that, realms of power that no human has ever truly explored. I will be the one to claim them. Mo regarded me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, his silence as heavy as the evening mist swirling around us. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a strange mixture of skepticism and intrigue. What do you want in return for this extraordinary promise? I paused, considering his words carefully. The temptation to demand something grand, something fitting of this monumental vow, was strong. But I knew what mattered most, what would truly serve both Mount Hua and my own goals. Tell your daughter you love her, I said simply. His reaction was subtle but unmistakable. A twitch of his brow, a tightening of his jaw, but in Mo Zenith's controlled language, it was as if I had struck him physically. She already knows that, he said, his voice edged with defensive uncertainty. No, she doesn't, I replied, shaking my head with quiet conviction. Seraphina loves you deeply, but she believes you see her as a disappointment. She thinks your expectations are impossible to meet, that your approval is forever beyond her reach. Change her mind. Spend time with her. Show her love openly. Praise her achievements. Be the father she needs, not just the sect leader she serves. Mo's lips parted as if to retort, but no words came. For all his power, all his mastery of martial arts and leadership, he stood there momentarily disarmed. His shoulders, so often squared with the weight of his duties as both father and ruler, seemed to sag under the enormity of my simple request. That is all you want? He asked at last, his voice unsteady, cracking like the surface of ancient ice. It was not a question born of disbelief but of something deeper, a tremor of vulnerability rarely shown by a man of his stature. I could see it in his eyes, the desperate desire to ask what I meant, to deny that Seraphina doubted his love. But his pride, his ingrained habits of authority held him back. No, I said quietly, pressing forward while his defenses were lowered. Pay more attention to the sect itself. Mo's brows furrowed, the steel returning to his gaze. You dare lecture me on how to lead Mount Hua? I do, I said, meeting his glare with calm defiance that surprised us both. Stop chasing the martial king's shadow. You cannot measure the worth of Mount Hua by comparing it to his legendary achievements. The sect has its own path, its own potential for greatness. I stepped closer, my voice carrying the conviction of absolute certainty. Trust me, I will swear it on my mana, bind it to my very soul if needed. I will take the plum blossoms of Mount Hua and make them bloom brighter than the martial king's swordsmanship ever could. Under my guidance, this sect will achieve heights that surpass even the legends of old. The silence that followed was deafening. Mo's presence loomed like an approaching storm, but I stood firm, my words resonating in the charged air between us. This was not mere negotiation. It was a turning point that would reshape the future of Mount Hua, perhaps the future of the martial world itself. At last, Mo Zenith nodded, a gesture as reluctant as it was resolute. You are either the greatest fool I've ever encountered, he said slowly, or the most audacious genius in human history. Perhaps both, I replied, allowing a faint smile to touch my lips. But I am also someone who keeps his promises. For a moment, Mo said nothing, his gaze distant as he processed the implications of what had just transpired. Then he turned, the faintest sigh escaping him as he began to walk away, his steps slow and deliberate. He did not explicitly agree to my terms, but I knew the seed had been planted in fertile ground. As the mist thickened around me, I stood alone with my resolve unshaken. This was only the beginning of a journey that would test every limit of human potential. The road ahead would be treacherous beyond imagination, but the path was clear, and I would walk it, no matter the cost, until I stood where even Magnus had never dared to dream of reaching. Chapter 554. An Ice Flower 9. Mo Zenith walked away from his discussion with Arthur, his steps slow and deliberate, the weight of their exchange lingering in the air like the last note of a distant melody. His expression, so often a mask of cold authority, was now shadowed with something uncharacteristic reflection. If any other boy had dared to speak such words to him, they would not have lived to finish their sentence. A swift flick of his hand, and their arrogance would have been silenced forever, a lesson etched into the fabric of the sect. But with Arthur Nightingale he could not. It wasn't that the boy was beyond him, far from it. In this moment, Mo could end him as easily as snuffing out a candle. No, it was something far more disarming. The words the boy spoke. There had been no bravado in Arthur's tone, no flourish of youthful arrogance. What there had been, instead, was belief. Absolute, unshakable conviction. A certainty that resonated not just with the ears but with the soul, a declaration that could not be ignored. Mo's lips curled into a smile, faint but genuine, a rare expression, and one that felt oddly fitting after their exchange. "I suppose I have no reason not to accept," he murmured to himself, his voice quiet in the stillness of the mist. After all, Arthur Nightingale had not simply made a promise. He had delivered a challenge to the heavens themselves. He would take Mount Hua's plum blossoms, the sect's pride and legacy, and raise them to heights they had never dreamed of reaching. A bold claim, but Mo found he wanted to believe it. A Nightingale, he thought, the boy's surname turning over in his mind like a puzzle piece that finally clicked into place. That name alone gave weight to Arthur's words, a substance that few could fully grasp. And if Arthur truly was that Nightingale, then perhaps the boy's confidence was not misplaced. Mo's eyes narrowed as he strode through the mist. The night air was cool, and the soft rustle of leaves punctuated his thoughts. For all his skepticism, he could not deny the spark of anticipation that had ignited within him. "I suppose we need to get to work, then," he muttered, his voice carrying an edge of resolve. The path ahead would be arduous, fraught with challenges both seen and unseen. But Mo Zenith was not a man to shy away from adversity. And if Arthur Nightingale believed himself capable of leading Mount Hua to the peak, then Mo would ensure the boy had the opportunity to prove it. As the mist thickened around him, Mo's steps quickened, his purpose renewed. The wheels had been set in motion, and there was no turning back now. However, Mo Zenith paused mid-step, the mist curling around him like ghostly tendrils, as if urging him to stay a moment longer with his thoughts. Arthur's words lingered in his mind, sharper than any blade and impossible to ignore. "Seraphina loves you but thinks you hate her." It was a sentence delivered with the bluntness of youth and the wisdom of someone who had seen too much too soon. For all his strength, all his experience, Mo found himself shaken, not by the statement itself, but by the truth it uncovered. A truth he had never dared to consider. He had always thought Seraphina knew. How could she not? He had raised her, protected her, and guided her as best he could. His love for her was as vast and unshakable as the mountains of Mount Hua themselves. But Arthur's words suggested otherwise. "She loves you but doesn't know you love her." The thought landed with the weight of a mountain, pressing against his chest. How had this chasm of misunderstanding come to exist between them? He had always attributed their distance to time, or rather, the lack of it. His responsibilities as head of the sect, as a radiant ranker, as a king among men, demanded so much of him. He had believed that she understood, that she accepted the silences between them as a necessity, not an absence. But he had been wrong. Mo's gaze turned inward, searching the memories he had of Seraphina. Her quiet strength, her unwavering determination, the subtle ways she sought his approval without ever asking for it outright. And now, beneath those recollections, he saw something he had overlooked, a shadow of doubt, a hesitation in her eyes when she looked at him. He closed his own eyes for a moment, his jaw tightening. Arthur's challenge was clear. If Seraphina believed he did not love her, then it was his failing, not hers. He, Mo Zenith, who had bent the world to his will, had faltered in the one role that mattered most, a father. He let out a slow breath, his resolve hardening. Before he could guide Mount Hua to its future, before he could rise to meet Arthur's audacious promises, he had to face his daughter. Not as a leader, not as a radiant ranker, but as a father, a flawed, fallible man who needed to tell her what he had long assumed she already knew. "I need to talk to her first," Emo murmured to himself, his voice heavy with both determination and regret. The path to repairing their bond would not be easy. Words, after all, could be as slippery as the mist around him, their meanings lost if not wielded with care. But Emo had faced storms before, and this was one he could not afford to lose. Turning back toward the main hall, Emo Zenith walked with purpose, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. Arthur had given him a truth he had not wanted to see, but for that, Emo found himself grateful. For the first time in years, he was not walking as the head of Mount Hua sect but as a father seeking his daughter. And he would not falter. Emo Zenith stood outside Seraphina's room, his hand hesitating over the door. The sliding magnetic door hummed faintly, a soft, almost imperceptible sound in the quiet corridor. The polished metal surface reflected his face, the tension in his expression more evident than he would have liked. For all the battles he had fought, this moment felt strangely more daunting. Words were not his weapon of choice, but tonight they had to be. He tapped the panel, and the door slid open with a smooth hiss, revealing the dimly lit room beyond. Soft lighting bathed the space in warm tones, illuminating sleek shelves lined with books, scrolls, and glowing holographic screens. Seraphina sat near the window, her figure silhouetted against the lit skyline of Mount Hua, its towering spires reaching into the stars. She turned at the sound, her silver hair catching the light as she regarded him with calm curiosity. "Father?" she said, her voice even, though her golden eyes held a glimmer of surprise. "Is something wrong?" Emo stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind him with a faint magnetic click. The sound echoed in the stillness, and for a moment, he stood there, uncharacteristically unsure of how to begin. "I wanted to talk to you," he said at last, his voice quieter than usual. Seraphina tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp. "You rarely come here," she said, her tone measured. "What's happened?" Emo approached her slowly, the soft hum of the room's atmospheric control system the only sound. He clasped his hands behind his back, the practiced posture of a man accustomed to commanding respect. But this time, there was no command in his voice. "It's about us," he said simply. Her brow furrowed slightly, her composure slipping just enough to reveal a flicker of confusion. "Us? Yes," Emo said, exhaling deeply. "I've realized something. Something I should have seen long ago. I failed you, Seraphina, not as the leader of Mount Hua or as a warrior, but as your father." Her eyes widened at his words, and she straightened, her calm exterior giving way to something more vulnerable. "What do you mean?" Emo paused, his gaze softening as he searched for the right words. "I thought you knew how much I cared for you, how much I loved you. I believed that my actions would speak for themselves. But actions, without words, can sometimes be misunderstood. Arthur made me realize that I've allowed a distance to grow between us. A distance you never deserved." Seraphina blinked, her golden eyes shimmering with emotion she rarely displayed. "You think I didn't know?" "Yes," Emo said, his tone heavy with regret. "I know now that you've always loved me, but I also know that you've questioned if I feel the same. And for that I am deeply sorry." Her gaze dropped to her hands, which she had folded tightly in her lap. "I've always admired you, Father," she said softly. "But I thought your duty came first, that I was just part of it." "No," Emo said firmly, stepping closer. "You are not a duty. You are my daughter, my pride, my joy, and I have been blind to the ways I failed to show it." For a long moment, Seraphina was silent. Then, with a slow exhale, she looked up at him. Her composure had returned, but there was a softness in her eyes now, a vulnerability she no longer hid. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "for saying that." Emo hesitated only briefly before reaching out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I promise you this, Seraphina. I will do better. I will make the time. You deserve nothing less." She nodded, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "I believe you." The magnetic door slid open and closed behind Mo as he left her room later that night, the hum of the mechanism fading into the quiet halls. Yet as he walked, he felt a new lightness in his step. For all the challenges that lay ahead, for the sect, for the world, this moment felt like a victory. Not as a leader, not as a warrior, but as a father. Chapter 555. An Ice Flower. 10. After speaking with my father, I collapsed onto my bed, the tension in my body unraveling like the final notes of a long-forgotten song. I hugged the pillow tightly, pressing its soft fabric against my skin as I exhaled, the weight of the evening settling over me like a heavy blanket. My father, Mo Zenith. The name echoed in my mind, a name that had always felt more like a title than a person. My mother had died when I was young, lost to the chaos when the Northern Sea Ice Palace was destroyed by the Shadow Seekers and torn apart by its own internal strife. My memories of her were faint, scattered images blurred by time and trauma. But my memories of my father? They were sharp, clear, and unyielding in their cold distance. He had always been so remote, a figure of authority and power, but never warmth. I had grown up believing that he didn't love me, couldn't love someone as weak as I was. How could he, when I wasn't worthy of carrying the legacy of the Mount Hua sect? Not when compared to the legends that came before us, not when I carried the stain of my mother's fallen palace. I was a disgrace, or so I had believed. That burden had clung to me like a shadow, whispering of inadequacy and failure. To surpass expectations I could never hope to meet, to strive for an ideal that seemed always just out of reach. But then I met Arthur Nightingale. The memory of our first encounter at the academy still brought a smile to my lips, even through my tears. Initially, he had been nothing more than a curiosity, a commoner who had somehow achieved rank 8 status, an impossibility that defied everything I understood about talent and breeding. In a world where power typically flowed through bloodlines and ancient families, Arthur Nightingale was an anomaly worth observing. My interest had been academic at first, clinical even. How had someone with no prestigious lineage, no inherited advantages, managed to reach such heights so young? I had studied him from a distance, analyzing his magical techniques, his strategic thinking, his unusual approaches to problems that left even experienced instructors impressed. But then something remarkable happened. Not one, but 2 princesses, Cecilia Slatemark and Rachel Creighton. Both began showing unmistakable interest in this enigmatic commoner. That transformed my curiosity into something deeper, more personal. If 2 of the most remarkable young women in the academy, both with impeccable bloodlines and their pick of suitors, found Arthur worthy of their attention, then perhaps there was far more to him than met the eye. I began watching him more closely, not just his magical abilities but the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence that never seemed to waver, the kindness he showed to those others overlooked. Slowly, my academic interest evolved into something I hadn't expected, genuine attraction. The turning point came when he suggested we visit the Northern Sea Ice Palace together. Even now, the memory of that proposal sent a shiver through me. I had spent years avoiding any mention of my mother's homeland, the place where she had lived and loved before everything crumbled into ruin. The palace had become a symbol of everything I feared about myself: weakness, failure, the capacity for destruction that seemed to run in my bloodline. "You need to face this, Serafina," Arthur had said with that gentle firmness that characterized him. "The past doesn't define you unless you let it. But ignoring it won't make it disappear either." I had wanted to refuse, to make excuses, to maintain the careful distance I kept from anything connected to my mother's legacy. But something in Arthur's eyes, not pity but understanding, made me trust him in a way I hadn't trusted anyone before. The journey to the Northern Sea Ice Palace had been one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Walking through those ruined halls, seeing the remnants of what had once been a place of beauty and power, feeling the echoes of the violence that had destroyed everything my mother had known, it should have broken me. Instead, Arthur's presence had given me strength I didn't know I possessed. "Look at this place," he had said as we stood in what had once been the palace's great hall. ice crystals still clinging to shattered walls like frozen tears. Yes, it fell. Yes, it was destroyed. But look at the craftsmanship that remains. The beauty that even destruction couldn't completely erase. Your mother came from this. Not the ending, but the magnificence that created it. He had helped me see the palace not as a monument to failure, but as proof of the incredible legacy I carried. The artistry in the icework, the sophisticated magical engineering that had kept the structure partially intact even after decades of abandonment, the elegant design that spoke of a culture rich in both beauty and power. You're not defined by how this ended, Arthur had continued, his hand finding mine as we explored rooms where my mother might once have walked. You're defined by what you choose to build from what remains. That day had changed everything. Not just my relationship with my past, but my understanding of who Arthur truly was. He wasn't just powerful or intelligent. He possessed an emotional wisdom that could heal wounds I hadn't even realized were still bleeding. My feelings for him had deepened from attraction to something approaching reverence. Here was someone who could look at broken things and see their potential for renewal, who could take someone like me, caught between worlds, haunted by legacy, and help them find strength in that very complexity. The competition with Cecilia and Rachel had intensified after that, but I found I understood it differently now. We weren't just three women competing for one man's attention. We were all drawn to the same extraordinary quality in Arthur, his ability to see the best in people and help them become it. But tonight, Arthur had done something that transcended even my elevated expectations. He had somehow managed to bridge the chasm between my father and me to accomplish what I had thought impossible, making Mo Zenith not just acknowledge me, but potentially see me as worthy of his love. Arthur, I whispered into my pillow, his name carrying the weight of everything he meant to me. Without Arthur, I was nothing. He was my everything, and he would forever be my everything. Arthur didn't just address my insecurities. He had systematically dismantled them, showing me that what I saw as weaknesses were actually sources of strength. My connection to both Mount Hua and the Northern Sea Ice Palace wasn't a burden. It was a unique foundation that no one else possessed. My emotional sensitivity wasn't a flaw. It made me more attuned to others' needs and more capable of deep connections. A warm tear slipped down my cheek, then another, until the pillow beneath me grew damp. I buried my face into it, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Arthur had given me. Not just love, but a completely transformed understanding of myself. Sorry for being a bit late, Serafina. Came that familiar voice, warm and steady, like coming home after a long journey through cold wilderness. Arthur? I whispered, my voice barely audible as I turned my tear-streaked face toward him. My vision blurred, but I didn't need perfect sight to recognize him. His presence was unmistakable, a warmth that seemed to light up the entire room. He knelt by my bedside, his arms open and welcoming. Without hesitation, I leaned into him, his embrace enveloping me like a protective shield against everything harsh in the world. He held me tightly, his hand rubbing gentle circles on my back while his other stroked my hair with infinite tenderness. "It's all right," he murmured, his voice carrying the same soothing quality that had helped me face my demons at the Northern Sea Ice Palace. "Let it out." And I did. I cried into his chest, my tears soaking into his shirt as his steady warmth anchored me to the present moment. He didn't offer platitudes or try to rush my emotions. He simply held space for them, his silence a testament to his deep understanding of what I needed. For the first time in years, I felt completely whole. Not because my burdens had disappeared, but because I no longer carried them alone. "Arthur?" I said softly, my voice hoarse after the torrent of emotions. My swollen eyes met his steady gaze as he raised his hand, his touch impossibly gentle as he brushed away the remnants of my tears. Then he leaned forward, pressing a delicate kiss to my forehead, a gesture so tender it nearly started the tears flowing again. "You're so perfect, my Arthur," I whispered, the words emerging unbidden but utterly sincere. In this moment, my usual concerns about sharing him with Rachel and Cecilia seemed distant and unimportant. They were part of his world, and I had learned to find peace in that reality. Even if I had to share him with the entire world, it wouldn't diminish what we had. Even if loving him brought pain, I would choose it every time. Because without Arthur, there was simply nothing. No light, no growth, no hope for becoming who I was meant to be. "It's all right, Sarah," Arthur murmured, his voice carrying that familiar note of absolute certainty that made me believe anything was possible. "You're safe." I reached out, wrapping my arms tightly around his neck, my head finding its perfect resting place against his shoulder. His arms enclosed me with steady strength that felt like an unbreakable promise, that whatever challenges lay ahead, I wouldn't face them alone. "I can never thank you enough," I whispered into his ear, my voice trembling with the depth of my gratitude. "For the Northern Sea Ice Palace, for tonight with my father, for seeing something in me worth saving. So I'll give you all of me, everything I am and everything I could become." Arthur pulled back just enough to meet my gaze, his hands cradling my face with reverent gentleness. "I love you, Sarah. I did all this because you're worth it, because I would do anything for you." The words resonated in my soul with perfect truth. This was love. Not just the feeling, but the action, the choice to see someone's potential and help them reach it. "I'm so glad I talked to you first, Arthur," I said, leaning into his warmth. "I'm glad I was curious enough to look past the surface. I'm glad I let myself care, and that you cared for me in return." His embrace tightened, and I felt the last of my emotional walls crumble away. This wasn't just romance. It was recognition, the meeting of two souls who made each other more complete. In Arthur's arms, surrounded by his unwavering love, I finally understood what it meant to be truly seen and cherished for exactly who I was. Chapter 556, 6 Superpowers, 1. The war in the East didn't just end with the death of the vampire monarch. It echoed. It rippled. It tore down names that had once been carved into the bedrock of power like commandments from gods. Everyone remembered the moment Magnus Drakkar became legend, ascended beyond immortal into the realm only one man before him had ever touched. A demigod. A title that meant something in a world where strength was currency more valuable than gold, truth, or even peace. But while statues would be raised and songs would be sung about Drakkar, other names were quietly buried in the ashes of what they once represented. The Kagu family fell. Not entirely, not into ruin or complete irrelevance, but something worse. We became ordinary. Aunt Selene, rank 2 Selene Kagu, the Twilight Ice Sovereign of the East, lay in a coma with no clear sign of waking. Her body remained unbroken, but her family, our family, shattered like glass under too much pressure. 8 immortal rankers gone in the span of months, 6 of them in the brutal, almost meaningless retaking of Warian. A Pyrrhic victory, if it could even be called that. The city stood, but the cost? Too high, much too high. And so a superpower, one of Earth's 7 great families, one that had given birth to the first hero Liam Kagu over a century ago, was no longer counted among the elite. The world had no patience for figureheads or titles without the weight to back them. Without Selene, there was no queen, and Uncle Kem, her older brother, held a title that felt more like a borrowed coat. Stiff, ill-fitting, and entirely unearned. He wasn't a king. He wasn't even a proper shadow of one. The man who had once stood confidently in his sister's shadow now seemed lost without her guidance, making decisions that felt reactive rather than strategic. We had achieved much, the Kagas, cardinals of the Red Chalice cult, some of the oldest vampire ancestors, gone, wiped from the map by the force of our will and legacy. The Pope himself had vanished into whatever dark hole spawns such creatures. But it wasn't enough. Not when the war took more than it gave, not when victory felt suspiciously like defeat dressed in different clothes. The Kagu family, rulers of the western half of the eastern continent, could still field troops, still raise banners, still command respect through reputation and fear of what we once were. But the spine had snapped, and a body without its spine can't walk, much less rule an empire. Power doesn't wait for the wounded to heal. Mount Hua didn't. The other half of the east rose swiftly, steadily, like water filling the space we'd left empty. They had bled too, but the difference was that their wounds became fuel. Their disciples grew strong in the furnace of conflict, tempered by adversity rather than broken by it. Land changed hands with disturbing frequency. Fortresses were rebuilt under new banners that bore the plum blossom instead of our ice crystal. And at the center of it all stood Sun Zenith, the adopted prince, now officially ranked among the immortal, albeit just at the lower threshold. Mount Hua, once balanced with the Kagus in uneasy partnership that had kept the East stable for decades, now stood alone at the top of our homeland. And me? I stared at the sunset, the red light dipping beneath the war-torn horizon like the last embers of pride dying in my chest. I was proud, had always been. Kagu by blood and birthright, a natural talent that teachers had praised and rivals had envied. One of the shining youths of my generation, spoken of in the same breath as other prodigies who would surely reshape the world. Now that pride felt like an old heirloom from a dead house. Something precious that no longer had context, no longer had meaning. I didn't know what to do with it. Didn't know what to build from the ashes of expectations that would never be fulfilled. Everything had changed in the span of months. The war had dimmed, yes, but it wasn't over. Cults stirred in the shadows like roaches after the lights went out. Miasmic creatures, demons, beasts, and worse things that defied easy categorization, pushed harder on the northern and southern borders. Even the west was aflame again, whispers of ogres and orcish hordes clawing at its edges with renewed vigor. But the east stood with borrowed time and borrowed strength. The reinforcements from the Slatemark Empire, those brilliant elites, those men and women who could level cities with a casual wave of their hands, would be gone by the end of August. Back to their center of power, back to the empire that could not be everywhere at once, no matter how much they might wish otherwise. And when they left, I wondered, who would protect what remained? Who would carry the weight once shouldered by Aunt Celine? Who would stand against the next threat, the next war, the next catastrophe that seemed to follow our family like a curse? And more than that, would I be strong enough to matter when that time came? I didn't have an answer. Only silence and a long horizon that seemed to stretch further away with every breath, mocking me with its indifference to my struggles. I knew how weak I was. That was the problem that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling and counting all the ways I fell short of what the Kagu name demanded. The real problem was time. There was just not enough time to become what I needed to be. I was talented, everyone said so, had always said so. My magical development progressed at rates that impressed instructors and intimidated peers. My tactical thinking showed promise that military advisors praised. But talent without time to mature was like a seed without seasons to grow. And now, when my family needed me most, when the Kagu legacy teetered on the edge of irrelevance, I was still weak, still young, still insufficient. Reim. The voice was soft, familiar, carrying the kind of gentle authority that could calm storms or start them depending on her mood. I turned to see my mother approaching, her emerald green hair catching the last rays of sunlight and her golden eyes reflecting a warmth that seemed impossible given everything we'd lost. Mother had just returned from putting He and Min to bed, my 6-year-old siblings who somehow maintained their innocence despite living through the collapse of everything they'd been born to inherit. At 6, they still believed in heroes and happy endings. At 18, I envied them that faith. "You're brooding again," she observed, settling beside me on the balcony with the same elegant grace that had made her legendary in diplomatic circles. Even now, even with everything falling apart around us, she carried herself like a queen, like someone who still believed in the possibility of victory. "Someone has to," I replied, not taking my eyes off the horizon. "Uncle Kem certainly isn't. He's too busy trying to pretend nothing has changed." Mother was quiet for a moment, studying my profile with those perceptive golden eyes that missed nothing. "You're carrying weight that isn't yours to bear, my son." "Whose weight is it, then?" I turned to face her, feeling the bitterness leak into my voice despite my efforts to contain it. "Aunt Celine's unconscious. Uncle Kem is overwhelmed. The family's reputation is crumbling. Someone has to think about what comes next. The adults will handle what needs handling," she said with quiet conviction. "Your uncle may not be your aunt, but he's not as helpless as you think." And there are others, advisors, allies, resources you don't see because you're not meant to see them yet. But what if it's not enough? The question escaped before I could stop it, carrying all the fear I'd been trying to suppress. What if everything we built just ends? What if the Kagu name becomes a footnote in history books? Mother reached out, her fingers gentle as she tilted my chin up to meet her gaze. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Ren? I wanted to look away, to avoid whatever disappointment or false comfort she might offer, but her golden eyes held me captive. I see potential that surpasses even your great-great-grandfather, she continued, her voice carrying absolute certainty. Liam Kagu was the first hero, yes. He changed the world, established our family's legacy, created the foundation for everything we became. But he was limited by his time, by what was possible in his era. She smiled, and for a moment the weight of our circumstances seemed to lift. You're not limited by those same constraints. You have access to knowledge he never possessed, techniques he never learned, opportunities he never dreamed of. More than that, you have something he never had, the chance to learn from both triumph and catastrophe. But I'm not ready, I protested. I'm not strong enough, not experienced enough. The family needs someone who can act now, not someone who might be capable someday. The family needs you to become who you're meant to be, she corrected gently. Not who you think you should be right now, but who you can grow into with time and proper guidance. Rushing that process, trying to carry burdens you're not prepared for. That's how potential gets wasted. I felt something ease in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. How can you be so certain? Because I've watched you grow. I've seen how you think, how you adapt, how you refuse to give up even when everything seems hopeless. Her smile widened. You have your aunt's strategic mind and your father's determination, but you also have something uniquely your own. The ability to see possibilities where others see only problems. The sunset was nearly complete now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded me of her eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than dread when I looked toward the horizon. What if I disappoint everyone? I asked quietly. What if you don't? She countered. What if you become everything I believe you can be? What if the Kagu name not only survives but reaches heights that even Liam never imagined? I took a deep breath, letting her words settle into the spaces where fear had been living. She was right, about the rushing, about the burdens, about the need to grow rather than simply endure. So what do? You learn, you train, you prepare. She stood, smoothing her dress with practiced elegance. You let the adults handle today's problems while you focus on becoming the solution to tomorrow's challenges. And you trust that when the time comes, when you're truly ready, you'll know exactly what needs to be done. As she walked back toward the house, leaving me alone with the dying light and her words, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not the desperate kind that clings to impossible dreams, but the steady, patient kind that builds foundations for future victories. The Kagu legacy wasn't ending with this generation. It was just beginning. Chapter 557. 6 Superpowers. 2. I exhaled as I finished the final swing of my training sequence, the blade cutting through the air with precision that would have been impossible just months ago. I wiped sweat from my brow as my lips curled into a satisfied smile, feeling the familiar burn of muscles pushed to their limits. Finally, I closed my eyes and reached inward with my consciousness, seeking that inner landscape where magical development could be observed and measured. And there it was, clear as daylight now. The wall. I had reached peak integration rank at last. The months of relentless training, the countless hours spent pushing my limits, the careful cultivation of my magical core. All of it had led to this moment. In front of me, visible in my mind's eye, stood the legendary barrier that separated integration rank from ascendant rank. This was what I needed to cross in order to step beyond mortal limitations and join the ranks of those who could truly shape the world. The wall loomed before me like a crystalline barrier, simultaneously beautiful and intimidating. I could feel the immense power required to break through, the fundamental transformation that awaited on the other side. You are training hard, a familiar voice said with obvious amusement, making me turn around from my contemplation. Big sis, I greeted my cousin Lilith, who leaned against the courtyard wall with characteristic casual elegance. Even in relaxed posture, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had reached high immortal rank at only 25. A level of power that put her among the continental elite. Peak integration rank, not bad at all. She grinned as she approached, her eyes taking in the obvious signs of my breakthrough with approval. She reached out to ruffle my hair in the same affectionate gesture she'd used since we were children, though now she had to stretch slightly to reach. You got so tall I have to extend my arm to reach your head now. Well, of course, I responded with mock seriousness. My father is tall, so I should be tall too, right? Basic genetics. Windward blood, she sighed with exaggerated resignation. She was quite tall herself, standing around 5 feet 10 inches thanks to the same bloodline, but my 6 feet 3 inches frame had definitely outpaced her growth. You men always have to show off with your height.
I tjokket her familiar complaints.
The Windward family had always produced tall, imposing figures, a trait that served us well in both political negotiations and combat situations. Anyway, Lilith said, shifting the conversation with the smooth transition that marked her as a skilled diplomat. Those two have gotten quite acclimated to northern life now. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as they met mine, and she gave me that sleazy grin I'd learned to be wary of. The future brides of our family are settling in well, I see. Big sis? I complained, feeling heat rise to my cheeks as she laughed at my obvious embarrassment. Despite my protests, I couldn't deny that her observation held more truth than I was comfortable admitting aloud. The two she referred to were indeed special to me. Siola Moyong and Dia Solarin, both of whom had found sanctuary in the north under circumstances that had forever changed their lives. They're not exactly future brides, I protested weakly, knowing even as I said it that Lilith wouldn't let me off easily. Oh, really? She raised an eyebrow with theatrical skepticism. So you're telling me you don't have feelings for the ice princess from the east who practices sword forms with deadly precision? And you definitely don't care about the flame-haired beauty from the southern sea sun palace who looks at you like you hung the moon? I opened my mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Lilith had always been able to see through my attempts at deception, a skill that made her invaluable as a diplomat and insufferable as a cousin. The truth was that I did care about both of them, deeply and in ways that sometimes kept me awake at night. But with everything happening, the ongoing aftermath of the war, the political instability, the trauma they'd both been through, I had been holding back. I didn't want to complicate their lives further when they were already dealing with so much. It's complicated, I said finally, which only made Lilith's grin widen. The best relationships usually are, she replied knowingly. Come on, let's go find them. I want to see how they're adjusting to their new lives here. We made our way through the Windward family compound, a sprawling complex that seamlessly blended traditional architecture with cutting-edge technology. Climate control systems maintained perfect temperature throughout the interconnected buildings, while holographic displays provided real-time security updates and communication feeds. The compound housed not just our immediate family but also retainers, guests, and various refugees who had found sanctuary under our protection. We found both young women in the family's private training facility, an advanced space. Siola was practicing sword forms with her usual methodical precision. Dia stood nearby with her own blade drawn, waiting for her turn in the training cycle, both of them at high integration rank and approaching their own confrontations with the wall. Siola, Dia, I called as we approached, noting how both of them stepped back from their training routines at my voice, their practice blades automatically powering down as the facility's AI recognized the session pause. Lucifer, Siola acknowledged with a small nod, though I caught the way her golden eyes lingered on my face a moment longer than strictly necessary. Her neural interface still displayed training metrics in the corner of her vision. Your training session went well? I reached peak integration rank, I reported, unable to keep the pride entirely out of my voice. Congratulations, Dia said warmly, her golden eyes lighting up with genuine happiness. That's incredible progress. You'll be crossing the wall soon. Eventually, I agreed, settling down on a nearby bench while Lilith made herself comfortable on a stone ledge. It's not something to rush. There was a moment of comfortable silence before I found myself looking at both of them. Really looking at them. These weren't just guests in our compound anymore. They had become integral parts of my daily life, my thoughts, my concerns for the future. Actually, I said, my voice carrying a note of nervous determination. There's something I need to talk to both of you about. They exchanged a meaningful glance, and I caught something that looked almost like relief in their expressions. We were hoping you'd say that, Dia said softly. Your mother spoke with us when I first arrived, Siola explained, her usual composure intact but her golden eyes watchful. She asked about our feelings, our intentions. My heart began to race. Mother had always been direct, but I hadn't realized she'd been having these conversations. What did she say? She told us that she could see how we looked at you, Dia replied, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. And she said that the Windward family values honesty above propriety. She also said, Siola continued, that if we were serious about our feelings for you, we shouldn't wait indefinitely for you to make the first move. I felt heat rising to my own cheeks. And what did you tell her? The truth, Dia said simply, that we both love you. More than love, Siola added quietly, her reserved exterior cracking to reveal something raw and honest. That we've been waiting for you to acknowledge what we all know is between us. The words hung in the air, carrying weight that seemed to alter the very atmosphere of the training facility. I found myself staring at both of them, these remarkable women who had somehow become the center of my world. I began, then stopped, taking a deep breath. I owe you both an apology. They looked at me with surprise, clearly not expecting that response. I thought I was being helpful by keeping my distance, I continued. I thought that with everything you've both been through, losing your homes, dealing with political upheaval, adjusting to life here, the last thing you needed was me adding romantic complications to your lives. Lucifer, Dia started, but I held up a hand. Please let me finish. I realize now that what I thought was consideration was actually just cowardice. I was protecting myself as much as trying to protect you, and in doing so, I was dismissing your agency, your ability to make your own choices about what you wanted. Siola's expression softened in a way few people ever saw. You were trying to be thoughtful, but it wasn't what either of us wanted, Dia added gently. We didn't need protection from our feelings. We needed honesty. I'm sorry, I said, looking between them both. I should have trusted you to know your own minds, and I should have been honest about my own feelings instead of trying to make decisions for all of us. Apology accepted, Siola said with a small smile. Definitely accepted, Dia agreed. But what matters now is what happens next. I took another deep breath, feeling like I was standing on the edge of that wall in more ways than one. The truth is, I love you both. I've been trying to figure out how to handle these feelings, how to choose between you without hurting anyone. But your mother? I glanced at where Lilith had been sitting, only to find she had quietly disappeared. Suggested that maybe I don't have to choose. The smiles that spread across both their faces were radiant. She mentioned that noble families often form political alliances through marriage, Siola said with her characteristic analytical precision, and that our situations create exactly the kind of circumstances that justify unconventional arrangements. Plus, Dia added with a mischievous grin, we've grown quite fond of each other as well, living here, training together, sharing our feelings about you. It's created a bond between us that goes beyond just both loving the same person. I looked at both of them, these extraordinary women who had somehow found a way to turn what could have been a rivalry into a partnership. So what are you saying? We're saying, Siola replied, that if you're willing to love us both, we're willing to share you. And each other, Dia added warmly. This isn't just about you being with both of us separately. We want to build something together, all three of us. I felt something tight in my chest finally relax. I want that too, more than I can express. So we're really doing this? Dia asked, her voice carrying excitement and hope. "We're really doing this," I confirmed. "No more holding back, no more second-guessing. If we're going to be together, let's be together properly." "Dating, then?" Siola asked with a rare, genuine smile. "Dating," I agreed. "With both of you. Let the compound gossips make of that what they will." Dia laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Oh, they're going to have a field day with this." "Let them," I said, reaching out to take both their hands. "I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you both." Chapter 558. 6 Superpowers. 3. This world had never been kind to heroes. That wasn't new information, but the way it went about proving it, time and time again, still had a way of tightening something in my chest. The fall of the Kagu family was just the latest reminder. Not a fall into ruin, no, more like a forced kneeling, the kind that cracked bone and left lasting scars. Stripped of their place among the 7 superpowers. Their royal standing unofficially revoked. The moment Selene Kagu had slipped into that coma, it all started crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. And until she woke, and that word "until" was doing a lot of heavy lifting, they were no longer rulers, just remnants clinging to past glory. Lucifer's burden, I thought, was heavier than anyone gave him credit for. When I first read the story, back when this world was still a fictional construct, back when I was nothing more than an outside observer, I had envied him. Everyone loved the prodigy. They cheered him on with genuine enthusiasm. His genius was a crown, not a curse, something to be celebrated rather than feared. While I had to navigate shadows and careful calculations, Lucifer was the chosen one. He got to shine without reservation. In this world, being normal was dangerous. Being extraordinary, that gave you a fighting chance at survival. But it also came with strings attached, golden chains that looked beautiful until you tried to move. People praised anomalies, but only until those anomalies disappointed them. And they always did, eventually. No one could live up to the impossible image the world painted of them. Lucifer tried. He was trying every single day. And in many ways, he'd already succeeded. If anyone was worthy of the title second hero, it was him. Just too young for the weight of it. The death of the vampire monarch had bought us time. Not peace, never peace. Not safety, that was a luxury we couldn't afford. Just breathing room. A chance to regroup and strategize before the next horror clawed its way out of whatever abyss it had been festering in. I stared at the holographic calendar hovering over my desk display. Rose's 18th birthday was in a few days. There'd be a celebration, of course. A quiet one, if she had anything to say about it. She'd always preferred intimate gatherings to grand spectacles. But it marked something else too. The slow, inexorable march back toward what passed for normalcy at Mythos Academy. Our 4th year would begin soon, and it would be my last. After this, I wouldn't have the luxury of time for classroom politics and academic exercises. Ouroboros was expanding its operations exponentially, and I'd be at the strategic center of it all. Research coordination, resource management, high-level interventions that required my personal attention. Mythos Academy couldn't keep pace with what I needed anymore, and frankly, it didn't have to. Lucifer could handle everything the Academy still had to offer. Every arc, every hidden danger, every trial the original narrative had meticulously planned. He'd grown into the kind of person who could carry that enormous weight without breaking. And me? I wasn't stepping back from the fight. I was just stepping into a different arena. There was still a war going on, after all. Multiple wars, if you counted the political maneuvering and resource conflicts that bubbled beneath the surface of every major decision. And someone had to plan for what came after the next hero inevitably fell. Because this world didn't forgive greatness. Not for long. I was currently in the north, standing within the impressive grounds of the Creighton estate, to negotiate what could be one of the most significant partnerships in recent magical history. "Hey, Ratch!" I greeted Rachel with a warm smile as she approached across the manicured garden. She returned the expression with radiant happiness, her head tilting slightly in that endearing way that had become so familiar. She looked absolutely stunning. The white sundress she wore complemented her figure perfectly, flowing with each graceful step. Her shimmering golden hair caught the afternoon sunlight like precious metal, and her deep blue eyes sparkled with the clarity of perfect sapphires. Even after all this time, her beauty still had the power to momentarily steal my breath. She hugged me tightly, her embrace warm and welcoming as she pressed against me and wrapped her arms around my neck with comfortable familiarity. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice carrying that delicate quality like moonlight made audible, yet with the subtle sensual undertone that never failed to send pleasant shivers down my spine. "I missed you," she said softly, holding me close in a way that made it clear just how much she'd been anticipating my arrival. Golden retriever, I thought, and it made sense. She was enthusiastic, affectionate, and utterly endearing in her straightforward expressions of affection. But then she began to deepen the embrace, her intentions becoming unmistakably clear. "Arach, I'm here to talk business with your father," I said gently, though not without some regret. She stopped immediately and pouted, her lower lip pushing out in an expression that was simultaneously adorable and slightly dangerous. "I can't wait until after Rose's birthday," she said, her face flushing with a becoming pink. "After that, I won't have to hold back anymore." She was absolutely right. The only reason I had to maintain such careful boundaries was because of the promise the four girls had made among themselves. It was their decision, their way of ensuring fairness and solidarity among themselves, and I respected it even when it made moments like this particularly challenging. "Soon," I promised, brushing a strand of golden hair from her face. "Very soon." Her expression brightened considerably. "Father's waiting for us in his study. He's been looking forward to this discussion almost as much as I've been looking forward to seeing you." We made our way through the estate's corridors, past tapestries and artifacts that spoke of centuries of Creighton family achievement. The architecture seamlessly blended traditional craftsmanship with modern conveniences. Climate control systems, security monitoring, and communication networks all integrated so smoothly they were nearly invisible. Alastor Creighton was waiting for us in his private study, a room that managed to be both imposing and comfortable. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with texts on magical theory, political strategy, and family histories. A massive desk dominated the center of the space, its surface covered with documents, holographic displays, and what appeared to be preliminary research notes. "Arthur," he said with genuine warmth, rising from his chair to greet me. Despite being one of the most powerful men on the continent, he'd always treated me with the kind of paternal affection that made calling him by his first name feel wrong. "Uncle Alastor," I replied, using the informal address that had become natural between us. His expression showed clear approval at the familiarity, though I noticed the way his eyes briefly tracked the lingering closeness between Rachel and me. "I trust your journey north was comfortable?" he asked, gesturing for us to take seats in the arrangement of chairs he'd prepared for our discussion. "Very smooth, thank you." "Excellent. Rachel's told me you have a proposal that could revolutionize magical technology development." His tone shifted subtly, becoming more businesslike while retaining its underlying warmth. "Something about a partnership with the Tower of Magic?" I nodded, settling into what I knew would be a complex negotiation. "Before we begin, I should mention that Charlotte Alaric has already agreed to sponsor Ouroboros. The Tower is committed to this partnership, but I wanted to discuss how the Creighton family might benefit from the arrangement." Alastor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Charlotte agreed to sponsorship? That's unexpected. She's not known for making such commitments lightly." "The resource we're discussing is that significant," I replied. "Uncle Alastor, what I'm about to share with you is confidential information that could reshape the entire magical technology landscape." Rachel leaned forward with obvious interest, her blue eyes bright with curiosity. "What kind of resource?" "Etherite," I said simply, watching both their reactions carefully. "A crystalline formation capable of conducting mana with perfect efficiency. No energy loss, no degradation over time." The silence that followed was profound. Alastor's expression shifted from polite interest to sharp focus, his mind clearly racing through the implications. "Perfect conductivity," he repeated slowly. That would make current mana enhancement systems obsolete overnight. Completely obsolete, I confirmed. Rachel's voice carried a note of awe. Where does this Etherite exist? The moon, I replied. They've had a small outpost there for astronomical observations and magical field studies. The unique magical environment of the moon creates Etherite formations that don't occur naturally on Earth. Alastair leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. And you want the Creighton family involved in this partnership because developing Etherite technology will require more than just access to the raw material, I explained. It will need advanced alchemical processing, sophisticated manufacturing techniques, and practical applications engineering. The Creighton family has the most advanced magical research and development capabilities outside of the tower itself. Plus, Rachel added with a sly smile, you want our support to prevent Charlotte from maintaining complete control over the discovery.
I tjoklet her perceptiveness.
That's certainly part of it. A monopoly on Etherite would give the tower unprecedented power. Shared development ensures balanced benefits and prevents any single institution from dominating magical technology advancement. Alastair nodded approvingly. Smart thinking. What exactly are you proposing? A three-way partnership, I said. The tower provides access to Etherite sources and theoretical research. The Creighton family handles practical development and manufacturing. Ouroboros manages field testing, security, and coordination between the parties. And profit sharing? Alastair asked with the directness of an experienced businessman. Equal three-way split on core applications. Specialized developments could have different arrangements depending on who contributes the most resources to specific projects. Rachel looked between her father and me with obvious excitement. This could establish magical technology standards for the next century. Easily, I agreed. The first institutions to master Etherite applications will define how the technology develops across every field. Alastair was quiet for several moments, his fingers drumming against his desk as he considered the proposal's ramifications. The political implications are significant, he said finally. Joint development would require unprecedented cooperation between the tower and our family. That's true, I acknowledged. But it also presents an opportunity to establish a new model for magical research collaboration. Success here could influence how future discoveries are developed and shared. And if the partnership fails? He asked. Then we all lose the opportunity to shape how Etherite technology develops, I replied honestly. Other institutions will eventually discover it independently, but they'll be years behind our potential progress. Rachel turned to her father with an expression that mixed business acumen with personal investment. Father, this isn't just about magical technology. It's about positioning our family for the future Arthur is building. Alastair's gaze sharpened as he looked at his daughter, then at me. The future Arthur is building, he repeated. That's an interesting way to phrase it. Arthur's plans extend far beyond this single partnership, Rachel continued confidently. Etherite development is just one component of a much larger strategy. Supporting him now means being part of that larger vision. I felt a flush of gratitude for her support, even as I recognized the weight of responsibility her words implied. Very well, Alastair said finally, his decision clearly made. The Creighton family will join this partnership. But I have conditions. Of course, I replied. What are your requirements? Full transparency about Etherite properties and potential applications, equal access to all research data, and a guarantee that our family's contributions will be properly credited in any public presentations of the technology. Agreed on all points, I said without hesitation. And one more thing, he added, his tone becoming more paternal as he looked between Rachel and me. I expect this business partnership to be conducted with the same integrity and respect you show in your personal relationship with my daughter. You have my word, Uncle Alastair, I replied solemnly. Rachel beamed at both of us, clearly pleased with how the negotiation had concluded. So we're really doing this? The three most advanced magical institutions on the continent, working together. We're really doing this, I confirmed. Welcome to the future of magical technology. As we shook hands to formalize the agreement, I couldn't help but think that this partnership represented more than just business cooperation. It was the foundation for the kind of world I was trying to build. One where collaboration triumphed over competition, where shared progress benefited everyone. The age of Aetheryte was about to begin. Chapter 559. A Blue Rose Blooms, 1. 18th birthday. 18 marked the age of becoming an adult in every legal and social sense, making it one of the most significant milestones alongside the 16th birthday when magical abilities fully manifested. But for most people, 18 simply meant freedom, responsibility, and the beginning of true independence. For me, it meant something far more profound. Tomorrow would be my 18th birthday, and with it would come the moment I had been waiting for, dreaming about, preparing myself for over these past months. The moment when I could finally be with Arthur completely, without reservation or artificial barriers. I was the last of the four of us to reach this milestone, my birthday falling latest in the year, but that was perfectly fine. After all, Arthur was a man I couldn't help but love with absolutely everything I had, every fiber of my being, every beat of my heart. He was worth waiting for. He was worth anything. The man who had saved me from my mother's shadow. The man who had given someone like me, the daughter of humanity's greatest enemy, the gift of genuine happiness and acceptance. I wouldn't care if I had to share him with 10 women, as long as I could feel his love, his touch, his complete acceptance warming my skin and filling the empty places in my soul that had ached for so long. I stood before the tall windows of my room in the Springshaper estate, watching the late afternoon sun paint the gardens in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow's celebration would be intimate, exactly as I preferred. Grand parties had always felt like performances to me, elaborate charades where I had to pretend to be someone I wasn't. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow would be real. Miss Rose. Mia's gentle voice interrupted my contemplation. My personal maid had been with our family for years, one of the few people who had never looked at me with fear or suspicion despite knowing exactly whose daughter I was. Your father would like to speak with you in his study, if you have a moment. I turned from the window, noting the careful way Mia phrased her request. Father never demanded my presence. He always asked, always treated me as though my feelings and preferences mattered. It was one of many ways he had helped me understand that I was more than just the circumstances of my birth. Of course, I replied, smoothing down my casual blouse and skirt. Thank you, Mia. As I made my way through the estate's familiar corridors, I caught glimpses of myself in the mirrors that lined the walls. Auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, brown eyes that reflected warmth rather than the cold calculation I had feared inheriting. Every time I saw my reflection, I felt a surge of profound gratitude that I looked nothing like her. I bore no trace of my mother's dark red hair or those terrifying jade-green eyes that had haunted my nightmares for years. Instead, I was entirely my father's daughter in appearance, a living reminder of the good that had created me rather than the evil that had tried to claim me. Father's study was a sanctuary of warm wood and comfortable leather, filled with books on governance, agricultural innovation, and magical theory. Modern holographic displays showed real-time data from the estate's operations, while traditional bookshelves lined the walls. Rose, he said warmly, rising from his desk as I entered. Even now, approaching middle age, he carried himself with the quiet dignity that had made him respected throughout the noble circles despite the scandal of his marriage. His auburn hair, now streaked with distinguished silver, caught the lamplight, and his brown eyes, so like my own, crinkled with genuine affection. Father, I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk that had become mine over years of conversations like this. Mia said you wanted to speak with me? Tomorrow is a significant day, he said, his voice carrying that careful tone he used when discussing important matters. Your 18th birthday will mark more than just reaching adulthood. I wanted to ensure you're prepared for everything that entails. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, understanding the delicate implications of his words. I'm ready, Father. I've been ready for quite some time. He nodded, though I caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested this conversation wasn't entirely comfortable for him. No father truly wanted to discuss his daughter's romantic relationships, especially when those relationships were as complex as mine. "Arthur is a good man," he said finally. "Better than I dared hope for when I first learned of your feelings for him. He's treated you with respect, shown patience when others might have taken advantage, and most importantly, he's helped you heal from wounds that I couldn't address alone." The last part was said quietly, but with such profound gratitude that it made my throat tighten with emotion. Father had done everything in his power to help me overcome the trauma of my childhood, the shame of my heritage, the fear that I might somehow carry my mother's evil within me. But it had been Arthur who had finally convinced me that I was worthy of love, that I could be more than just the daughter of humanity's greatest enemy. "He sees me," I said simply, "not as Evelyn's daughter, not as a political liability, not as someone to be pitied or feared. He sees Rose, just Rose. And that's all you've ever wanted to be." Father replied with understanding that came from years of watching me struggle with my identity. "It is." I paused, gathering courage for what I needed to say. "Father, I know my relationship with Arthur is unconventional. The arrangement with Rachel, Cecilia, and Serafina. I know it's not what you would have chosen for me under normal circumstances." He was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Normal circumstances," he repeated. "Rose, nothing about our lives has ever been normal. Your mother saw to that. What matters to me is your happiness and well-being. If sharing Arthur's affections with 3 other remarkable young women brings you joy and fulfillment, then I support it completely. Even though it means I'll never be anyone's only love." "You are Arthur's love," he corrected gently. "The fact that he has room in his heart for others doesn't diminish what he feels for you. If anything, it speaks to the generosity of spirit that drew you to him in the first place." I felt tears prick at my eyes. Sometimes I wonder if I'm selfish for wanting this, for wanting him despite everything complicated about who I am. "My dear daughter," Father said, his voice filled with the fierce protectiveness that had shielded me throughout my childhood. "You deserve love. You deserve happiness. You deserve to be cherished exactly as you are. Never let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." A soft knock at the door interrupted our conversation. "Come in," Father called. Mia entered with a tea service, her movements efficient but unobtrusive. She had clearly anticipated that our conversation might require the comfort of familiar rituals. "Thank you, Mia," I said as she poured steaming tea into delicate porcelain cups. The familiar scent of chamomile and honey filled the room, bringing with it memories of countless evenings when Mia had helped soothe my nightmares with this same blend. "Miss Rose," Mia said as she prepared to leave, "shall I lay out the designer cocktail dress for tomorrow's celebration? The one that arrived from Southern Continent last week." I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere. "That would be perfect. Thank you." After Mia left, Father and I sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our tea and watching the shadows lengthen across the room. As I prepared to leave his study, Father called my name once more. "Rose, be happy tomorrow. You've earned it." Later that evening, as Mia helped me change into comfortable pajamas for bed, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The years of shame and self-doubt, the fear that I might somehow be tainted by my mother's evil, the gradual healing that had come through Father's unwavering love and Arthur's patient acceptance. "Miss Rose," Mia said as she brushed my auburn hair, "you seem peaceful tonight, content." "I am," I replied, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I know exactly who I am and what I want." "And what's that, if you don't mind me asking?" I smiled, thinking of tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would follow. "I want to be Arthur's Rose, just Rose, who is loved for exactly who she is." "I think," Mia said with the gentle wisdom that had guided me through so many difficult moments, "that tomorrow you'll get exactly what you want." As I settled into bed, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my room and the loving protection of my family, I felt something I had never quite experienced before. complete peace with who I was and excitement for who I was becoming. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of my adult life. But more than that, it would mark the moment when I finally, fully stepped into the love I had been afraid to believe I deserved. 18 had never felt so much like freedom. Chapter 560. A Blue Rose Blooms. 2. The Springshaper estate looked magnificent in the evening light, its modern architecture seamlessly blending with carefully maintained gardens that stretched toward the horizon. As my transport pulled up the circular drive, I could see warm light spilling from the windows of the main hall, and the subtle glow of magical enhancement fields that provided both security and ambience for tonight's celebration. Rose's 18th birthday, the day we had all been waiting for, though perhaps none more than Rose herself. I straightened my formal jacket, a perfectly tailored piece in midnight blue that complemented my eyes, and checked my appearance one final time in the vehicle's mirror. Tonight had to be perfect, not just because it marked Rose's transition to adulthood, but because it represented the culmination of months of careful patience and growing anticipation. The evening air was crisp as I stepped out of the transport, carrying with it the scent of the estate's prize-winning roses and the subtle magical energies that always seemed to hover around places where powerful families gathered. I could hear the soft murmur of conversation and gentle music drifting from the main hall, indicating that the celebration was already well underway. Marquis Everett Springshaper met me at the main entrance, his auburn hair neatly styled and his formal attire impeccable. His brown eyes, so like Rose's, held their usual warmth, though I detected an undercurrent of something more complex. Pride, certainly, parental protectiveness, and perhaps a touch of the melancholy that came with watching one's child cross the threshold into adulthood. "Arthur," he greeted me with genuine warmth, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. Rose has been anticipating your arrival all day." "Thank you for having me, sir," I replied, clasping his hand firmly. "I wouldn't miss this for anything in the world." He studied my face for a moment, and I had the distinct impression he was seeing not just the young man who had arrived for his daughter's party, but the person who would play such a significant role in her future. "She's in the main hall," he said finally, "though I suspect you already know exactly where to find her." I smiled at his perceptiveness. "I do indeed." The main hall had been transformed for the occasion. Elegant lighting fixtures cast a warm glow over polished floors, while arrangements of white and pale pink flowers, roses, naturally, decorated every available surface. The guest list was deliberately intimate, perhaps 50 people in total, consisting primarily of family friends, a few classmates from Mythos Academy, and several political allies whose presence was diplomatically necessary. But my attention was immediately drawn to the figure standing near the hall's center, engaged in conversation with a small group of well-wishers. Even from across the room, Rose's presence seemed to command attention in a way that had nothing to do with her noble birth and everything to do with the quiet confidence she had developed over these past months. She was wearing a designer cocktail dress in deep emerald green that complemented her auburn hair beautifully. The modern cut was both elegant and age-appropriate, striking the perfect balance between sophisticated and youthful. Her brown eyes sparkled with genuine happiness as she spoke with her guests, and I found myself momentarily mesmerized by the transformation from the uncertain girl I had first met to this poised young woman. As if sensing my gaze, she turned toward the entrance, and our eyes met across the room. The smile that spread across her face was radiant enough to outshine every magical enhancement in the hall. "Excuse me," I heard her say politely to her companions as she began moving in my direction, her steps graceful and purposeful. I met her halfway, aware that we had become the focus of subtle attention from the other guests. At events like this, every interaction was observed and analyzed for social and political implications. "Arthur," she said softly as she reached me, her voice carrying that particular warmth reserved for moments when we were together. "Happy birthday, Rose," I replied, producing a small, elegantly wrapped package from my jacket pocket. "Though I have to say, you look far too beautiful to be only 18. She blushed at the compliment, her cheeks taking on a becoming pink that made her brown eyes seem even more luminous. "You're terrible," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't mind my flattery in the least. Without hesitation, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her in a warm, lingering embrace. I felt her melt against me, her head finding its natural resting place against my shoulder. For a moment, the rest of the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us and the comfortable intimacy we had built over these many months. "I missed you," she whispered against my ear, her breath warm against my skin. "I missed you too," I replied honestly. "More than you know." When we finally separated, I offered her my arm in the traditional gesture of escort. "Shall we make our entrance official?" Her smile was brilliant as she slipped her hand through my arm. "I would be honored." We moved through the room together, stopping to greet various guests and accept their congratulations on Rose's milestone birthday. I was struck by how natural she seemed in this environment, engaging with family, friends, and political acquaintances with the kind of diplomatic grace that spoke to years of careful training. There was no trace of the uncertain girl who had once worried about her worthiness or struggled with the shame of her heritage. The other three princesses were present, of course. I caught glimpses of them throughout the early evening, each stunning in their own distinctive way. Cecilia Slatemark stood near the refreshment table, her golden hair catching the light like spun sunshine, while her red eyes surveyed the room with the kind of sharp intelligence that made her such a formidable political ally. She wore a dress in deep crimson that complemented her coloring perfectly, and I could see several young nobles attempting to engage her in conversation with varying degrees of success. Rachel Creighton was holding court near the hall's large windows, her own golden hair styled in an elegant updo that showcased her graceful neck. Her deep blue eyes sparkled with amusement as she spoke with a group of family friends, her dress in royal blue bringing out the sapphire depths of her gaze. Even from across the room, I could sense the warm affection in her glances toward me. Serafina Zenith stood somewhat apart from the main crowd, her silver hair seeming to shimmer with its own inner light and her ice-blue eyes observing the proceedings with characteristic analytical precision. Her dress was a pale silver that seemed to have been designed specifically to complement her ethereal beauty. She caught my eye and offered a small, knowing smile that sent a familiar warmth through my chest. As the evening progressed and dinner was served, I found myself seated at the head table beside Rose, with the Marquis on her other side. The conversation flowed easily, touching on current events, Rose's plans for her final year at Mythos Academy, and carefully neutral topics that avoided any potentially controversial subjects. "Arthur," the Marquis said during a brief lull in conversation, "Rose tells me you'll be graduating this year as well." "Yes, sir," I replied. "My commitments with Ouroboros have grown to the point where continuing at the academy would be impractical." "And what are your plans after graduation?" he asked, though something in his tone suggested this wasn't idle curiosity. I glanced at Rose, who was listening with obvious interest. "I'll be focusing on expanding Ouroboros' operations. We have several major projects in development that will require my full attention." "Important work," he acknowledged, "though I hope it won't keep you too busy to visit us occasionally." The meaningful look he gave me suggested that his concerns extended beyond simple social visits. "Never too busy for that, sir," I assured him. As dinner concluded and the formal portions of the evening wound down, the musicians began playing more contemporary music suitable for dancing. This was the moment I had been anticipating, and the moment that would solidify tonight's significance in the eyes of everyone present. I rose from my seat and extended my hand to Rose. "Would you honor me with the first dance?" Her face lit up with pure joy. "I would love to." The other guests cleared a space in the center of the hall as we moved onto the impromptu dance floor. The musicians, clearly prepared for this moment, began playing a waltz that was both classical in structure and modern in arrangement. As I took Rose in my arms, positioning my hand at her waist while she placed hers on my shoulder, I was struck by how perfectly we fit together. She had grown taller over these past months, though she was still delicate enough that I felt protective holding her. "You're an excellent dancer," I murmured as we began moving to the music. "I had excellent instruction," she replied, her brown eyes never leaving mine. "Though I have to admit, this feels different from all those practice sessions." "Different how?" "More real," she said simply. More. Significant. She was right, of course. This wasn't just a dance between friends or even between a young man and woman who cared for each other. This was a public declaration, a statement to everyone present about the nature of our relationship and our intentions for the future. As we moved together across the floor, I was aware of the watching eyes of the other guests, the whispered conversations that would undoubtedly follow tonight's display. But more than that, I was conscious of the 3 other young women who were also watching, each understanding exactly what this dance represented. When the music ended, the applause was warm and genuine. I bowed slightly to Rose, who curtsied with the grace of someone trained in traditional etiquette, before escorting her back to the edge of the dance floor. That was perfect, she whispered as we rejoined the crowd. The first of many, I hope, I replied, earning another brilliant smile.